Across oceans, deserts and icy expanses, some journeys end not in arrival but in silence. Vessels vanish into fog-shrouded harbours, aircraft fade into uncharted skies, and submarines send out cryptic last transmissions before disappearing beneath the waves. Each final radio message, terse or fragmented, hints at urgent warnings, unseen dangers, or enigmas that defy explanation. From the Andes' snowbound ridges to the vastness of the Atlantic, these disappearances leave only traces, a Morse code fading into the ether, wreckage half buried and questions that linger longer than any answer. As you travel through these lost expeditions, you will trace the paths of those who vanished, hearing the static of their last communications, seeing the remote landscapes where they disappeared, and piecing together clues that hint at their final moments. You will witness the mysteries that continue to haunt historians, cryptographers, and adventurers, where human endeavour meets forces beyond comprehension. The Franklin Expedition's Silence Beneath the Ice, 1845. In May 1845, 2 Royal Navy vessels departed England under the command of Sir John Franklin, bound for the uncharted channels of the Canadian Arctic in search of the Northwest Passage. HMS Erebus and HMS Terror carried 129 officers and men, reinforced hulls, auxiliary steam engines, and provisions intended to sustain years in polar isolation. Confidence followed them northward, strengthened by recent advances in naval engineering and preserved food storage. Yet the expedition would not return, and the only formal communication it ultimately left behind was a brief written message deposited in a cairn on King William Island, a final recorded statement that confirmed death, abandonment, and entrapment in ice, while not explaining how events had unravelled so completely. Franklin's ships departed with 129 officers and men, including experienced polar hands such as Captain Francis Crozier and Commander James Fitzjames, and they carried 3 years' worth of tinned food along with coal for auxiliary steam engines adapted from railway locomotives. The Admiralty believed it had prepared thoroughly, outfitting the vessels with reinforced bows to withstand pack ice and installing heated cabins intended to preserve morale in polar darkness. By late July 1845, whalers in Baffin Bay recorded their last confirmed sighting of the ships, moored to ice floes near Lancaster Sound. Letters were exchanged with homebound vessels, and the crews appeared orderly and optimistic. After that point, no verified communication reached Britain again. Unlike later expeditions that relied on wireless signals, Franklin's venture operated in an era before radio transmission, yet its final communications were no less haunting for their absence. The expedition's last documented words were carried by ship and memory rather than by airwaves, preserved in correspondence handed to passing whalers and official dispatches filed before entering the labyrinth of Arctic channels. When years passed without further news, the silence itself acquired the weight of a final message, as if the ice had intercepted every possible call for help. The Admiralty initially assumed routine delay, since polar winters often forced ships to overwinter. Confidence lingered, but unease quietly gathered in London drawing rooms. By 1848, when no word had arrived, the Admiralty organised search expeditions that fanned out across Baffin Bay and the Beaufort Sea, transforming the Arctic into a theatre of anxious reconnaissance. What they discovered over the following decade were fragments that seemed almost deliberately incomplete: abandoned campsites, scattered tin cans, and eventually skeletal remains on desolate shores. The most significant document emerged in 1859 when Lieutenant William Hobson of the search vessel Fox located cairn at Victory Point on King William Island. Inside was a printed Admiralty form dated May 28, 1847, stating that all was well. Around the margins, however, a second message dated April 25, 1848, recorded that Franklin had died on June 11, 1847, and that the ships had been deserted. The Victory Point note revealed that 24 officers and men had already perished by April 1848, and that the remaining 105 survivors, now led by Crozier, intended to march south toward the Back River on the Canadian mainland. The handwriting, cramped into the narrow edges of the form, carried none of the panic one might expect, yet its restrained phrasing only intensified the dread. It indicated that HMS Erebus and HMS Terror had been beset in ice since September 1846, trapped in Victoria Strait for nearly 2 years. The ice had not merely delayed them, it had claimed dominion over the expedition's movement, sealing the ships into an unmoving prison. Subsequent Inuit testimony, gathered by searchers such as John Ray in the 1850s, described groups of gaunt white men dragging sledges southward across the frozen landscape, some collapsing along the way. Ray reported evidence suggesting cannibalism among the final survivors, a claim that provoked controversy in Victorian Britain but was later supported by forensic analysis of cut marks on recovered bones. These accounts suggested that the orderly retreat envisioned in the Victory Point note devolved into desperation as provisions dwindled and scurvy weakened bodies. The Arctic, indifferent to rank or ambition, reduced officers and sailors alike to the same struggle against exposure and hunger. For more than a century, the exact resting places of the ships remained unknown, leaving historians to speculate whether they had been crushed by ice or drifted elsewhere before sinking. Advances in marine archaeology and renewed Canadian searches eventually yielded answers that were as dramatic as they were belated. In 2014, Parks Canada located the wreck of HMS Erebus in Queen Maud Gulf, remarkably preserved in cold, dark water. 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered in Terror Bay, its hull largely intact, suggesting that it had sunk in a controlled manner rather than a catastrophic rupture. The vessels had not simply disintegrated, they had settled into the seabed with a disquieting composure. Artifacts retrieved from the wrecks, including personal effects, navigation instruments, and even intact dishware, conveyed an impression of interrupted routine rather than explosive disaster. A ship's bell, boots, and scientific equipment testified to the expedition's original purpose of mapping and measurement, underscoring how abruptly ambition had yielded to survival. Forensic studies of exhumed remains from Beechey Island, where 3 crew members were buried during the first winter, revealed elevated lead levels likely stemming from soldered tin cans and the ship's water systems. Scholars continue to debate how much this contamination contributed to cognitive decline and impaired decision-making during the crisis. Despite these discoveries, no detailed narrative from the final months survives, and the absence of a comprehensive logbook has become the expedition's most persistent enigma. The Admiralty's confidence in steam power and preserved provisions collided with an Arctic environment capable of immobilizing even reinforced hulls, and yet the ship's ultimate condition suggests measured actions long after hope might have faded. Why Crozier chose to abandon the vessels, whether alternative escape routes were considered, and how long any survivors endured after leaving the ships remain questions sustained by incomplete evidence. Each artifact answers a practical question while opening another that reaches further into uncertainty. The Franklin expedition thus occupies a singular place in polar history, not only because it sought a geographic prize, but because its final communication consisted of a sparse official form and the vast uninterrupted quiet that followed. Where later expeditions transmitted frantic radio calls that dissolved into static, Franklin's men left behind a written record that was calm, procedural, and devastatingly finite. The Arctic did not echo with distress signals, it absorbed them before they could ever be spoken. And in that frozen silence, the last unspoken words of 129 men remain locked beneath the shifting ice. The Lady Be Good and the Desert Transmission, 1943. The desert stretched endlessly below the B-24's wings, a golden expanse that swallowed every horizon, while the crew of the Lady Be Good sent one last radio signal that would never find its listeners. On April 4th, 1943, the bomber departed Solush Field in Libya for a routine bombing mission over Naples, Italy, part of the United States Army Air Force's 376th Bomb Group. The 9-man crew followed charts and instruments with precision, unaware that the vast North African desert below would soon become an insurmountable expanse, separating them from survival. This final radio transmission, brief and routine in tone, would be their last known contact with the outside world, and in hindsight, it became a haunting marker of their disappearance. Inside the cramped fuselage, the hum of engines mingled with the meticulous coordination of 9 men, each trained for precision yet utterly vulnerable to the vastness below. Pilot Robert Toner, co-pilot Leonard Duncan, navigator Leonard Keck, and the rest of the crew worked within their stations with practiced efficiency, monitoring fuel gauges, altimeters, and directional compasses. Even minor adjustments to the course required constant attention, and the desert's flat, unbroken expanse offered no visual cues, transforming the landscape into an endless labyrinth. Each crew member relied not only on instruments, but on each other, yet the environment outside the aircraft was indifferent to their coordination, indifferent to survival. The mission to strike targets across Italy had been executed with mechanical discipline, but even seasoned navigators could not foresee how the desert winds would distort their path once they veered from the coast. Strong Saharan gusts could alter the plane's trajectory by miles without the crew realizing, and over such empty terrain, the consequences of even minor miscalculations are magnified with every passing minute. While Europe's coastlines had been surveyed and mapped repeatedly, the desert remained treacherous, offering no markers to confirm latitude or longitude. By the time the bomber was well into the Sahara, the crew's instruments may have provided reassurance, yet the landscape below conspired silently to erase their position from any human awareness. Moments before contact faded, faint transmissions crackled over the radio, a fragile lifeline stretching across hundreds of miles of silent sand and sky. Operators in Libya logged routine check-ins as the plane moved steadily eastward, and the crew's voice was clear, measured, and calm. There was no panic, no hint of mechanical failure. Still, within hours the radio went silent. The brevity of the last broadcast became almost ominous, a reminder that communication could not bridge the vastness below, and that the desert itself could absorb both signals and lives alike. This final radio message, sent from a drifting aircraft miles from its intended route, became the last thread connecting the lost crew to the world they had left behind. For weeks, military command believed the plane had simply returned to base or landed safely in Italy, but as days passed with no confirmation, concern deepened. The message's sudden termination did not explain. No coordinates, no distress, nothing to illuminate the crew's fate. In the absence of follow-up, the desert assumed the role of silent arbiter, and the crew's disappearance became both a factual report and a growing enigma, suspended in time. As the sun climbed, the desert heat pressed against the aluminum skin of the bomber, and the invisible expanse below seemed to absorb every sound, every hope, leaving only isolation. Temperatures on the sand could rise to unbearable levels, distorting visual references and creating heat mirages that warped judgment. From above, the desert appeared endless, flat and forgiving, yet it concealed danger at every mile. Fuel reserves dwindled, and navigational errors compounded with each passing hour. The crew's isolation was total. No human eyes could witness their struggle, and no transmission would return to confirm their fate. Search parties would not discover the wreckage for 15 years, when shifting sands revealed the aircraft's remains in a place that defied the navigator's charts and expectations. In 1958, a team of geologists stumbled upon the wreck in the Libyan desert, approximately 710 kilometers inland from Solishfield, far off course from any anticipated return path. The bomber's intact fuselage, wings partially buried in sand, and scattered personal belongings painted a stark picture of disorientation and endurance. Yet the radio had left its mark in history, a haunting reminder of a connection that had ended abruptly and without explanation. The scattered artifacts inside told fragments of a story: empty seats, equipment untouched, and evidence suggesting the crew had survived longer than anyone anticipated before succumbing to the desert's merciless conditions. Field notes, maps, and logs indicated attempts to navigate or move on foot, but the extreme heat and lack of water claimed lives with relentless impartiality. Even with these discoveries, the details of the crew's last hours remained speculative, and the desert preserved its silence as though no human hand could ever fully read the final chapter of the plane's journey. Even decades later, historians and military investigators could piece together only a fraction of what had transpired, leaving the crew's final hours enveloped in enduring uncertainty. Analysis of the wreck suggested that the plane ran out of fuel while still airborne, leading to a crash that left no survivors. Yet questions lingered. Why had the crew flown so far inland, and why had the final transmission been sent without any apparent warning? Every answer uncovered only reinforced the mystery, underscoring the cruel impartiality of the desert and the ephemeral nature of human communication against such vastness. Every grain of sand seemed to carry whispers of that last broadcast, a signal lost to the void yet preserved in memory and the barren landscape itself. The aircraft's disappearance, coupled with the abrupt cessation of radio contact, transformed a routine bombing mission into an enduring puzzle. Scholars, journalists, and military historians alike reflected on the fragility of signals sent across unforgiving terrain and the way the desert could erase not only paths but histories. In this vast silence, the crew's final message assumed a spectral weight, a voice frozen in space and time, speaking to nothing but the wind. Beneath the relentless sun, the desert keeps the secret of those final voices, echoing across dunes that will never answer. The Star Tiger's final coordinates over the Atlantic, 1948. The Star Tiger's crew checked instruments and reported their position with routine precision, unaware that this final radio transmission would become the last record of their presence over the Atlantic. On the evening of January 28, 1948, the Avro Tudor IV, carrying 31 passengers and crew, climbed steadily into the cold winter sky, departing Lisbon Airport on a transatlantic journey that promised no surprises. The flight proceeded according to post-war procedures, with the navigator confirming headings and the pilots monitoring fuel and engine performance. When the final transmission reached air traffic control, it was calm, precise and normal. Yet it marked the moment after which the aircraft vanished without explanation. Inside the cabin, pilots and crew focused on instruments with practiced discipline, fully aware of the responsibility that rested on their shoulders. Captain Robert Howell and his co-pilot followed every procedure carefully, while the navigator consulted charts and plotted the course across open waters. Passengers settled in for the long flight, unaware of the fragile line of communication that linked them to the outside world. Although the Tudor IV was among the most modern airliners of the era, its advanced technology could not mitigate the risks inherent in a transatlantic journey over unmarked, storm-prone waters. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, turbulent air currents buffeted the fuselage, subtle enough to go unnoticed yet capable of altering the flight path over hundreds of miles. The Atlantic below offered no reference points, and cloud formations occasionally created optical illusions that challenged even seasoned pilots. Temperatures were bitterly low at high altitude, but the heated cabin shielded the crew and passengers from the biting cold. Still, the conditions highlighted the delicate balance between human skill, mechanical reliability, and the immense indifferent environment they traversed. Shortly before the final transmission, communication with Lisbon was routine. The crew confirmed altitude, heading, and estimated time to Bermuda. There was no indication of mechanical trouble or navigational error. Then, abruptly, silence claimed the Star Tiger. The radio signal ceased, leaving air traffic controllers with only the last fragment of routine updates, and establishing the final transmission as both a factual record and a symbol of the mystery that would endure for decades. Attempts to re-establish contact began immediately, with controllers documenting each failed communication and instructing nearby stations to listen for any signal. Hours passed with no reply, and concern turned to alarm as search protocols were initiated. With no precise location beyond the aircraft's last reported coordinates, the search area expanded exponentially, encompassing thousands of square miles of unpredictable ocean. Each unanswered call underscored the fragility of human connection across the vast, storm-prone Atlantic. Search planes and naval vessels combed the waters, but the immense expanse and unpredictable currents left no trace. Crews scanned the surface for debris, oil slicks, or any sign of wreckage, but waves and wind dispersed potential evidence quickly. Harsh winter weather complicated reconnaissance, and every attempt to locate the Tudor IV emphasized the sheer scale of the challenge. The ocean, silent and impartial, offered no answers, and every mile of open water reinforced the fragility of human presence in such isolation. Investigators later examined navigational charts, fuel calculations, and weather records to understand the circumstances of the disappearance. Every detail appeared ordinary. The aircraft was within fuel limits, the crew was experienced, and instruments showed no fault, yet no wreckage was ever recovered, leaving the disappearance unresolved. The final radio transmission remained the sole tangible trace of the Star Tiger, a haunting record that spoke of presence and sudden absence in equal measure. In the context of post-war commercial aviation, the Star Tiger's disappearance became a cautionary tale, demonstrating the limits of technology when confronted with the open sea. Airlines and regulators studied the incident to refine flight safety protocols, emphasizing redundancy, navigation checks, and emergency procedures. Historians note that the final radio communication remains a compelling element of the story, a fleeting connection that demonstrates both human ingenuity and vulnerability in the face of nature's immensity. From above, the Atlantic might appear calm and unbroken, but beneath the surface, currents shifted relentlessly, invisible to those attempting to trace the aircraft's path. Even decades later, researchers recognize the ocean as a silent witness to the Star Tiger's final flight, holding secrets that no search could fully uncover. The combination of technology, human skill, and environmental unpredictability created a scenario in which a routine flight could disappear completely, leaving only a single cryptic signal as evidence. Analysis of subsequent transatlantic flights and aviation safety investigations reinforced the mystery of the Star Tiger, emphasizing how swiftly a vessel could vanish without warning. Researchers and historians remain puzzled by the lack of debris and the abrupt cessation of radio contact. Each theory, from navigational error to sudden storm impact, underscores the tension between human expectation and the vast unpredictability of nature. The final transmission, brief and precise, remains a haunting reminder of the crew's presence and sudden absence. The Star Tiger's disappearance continues to captivate aviation experts and historians alike, serving as both a technical puzzle and a story of human vulnerability. Despite decades of scrutiny, the aircraft has never been recovered, and the final radio message remains the only direct link to the crew. Its abrupt end, recorded over the Atlantic's vast expanse, transformed a routine flight into one of the 20th century's most perplexing aviation mysteries, illustrating the fragility of communication and the unyielding authority of nature. Far out over the restless Atlantic, the last transmission drifts in silence, a fragment of human presence lost to the vast, unanswering expanse. The Star Ariel and the Clear Sky Disappearance, 1949. The crew of the Star Ariel completed their routine checks and reported their position to Bermuda Control, unaware that this ordinary transmission would become the final trace of their journey. On January 17, 1949, the Avro Tudor IV, carrying 20 passengers and 6 crew members, departed Bermuda for Kingston, Jamaica, on what should have been a standard transatlantic flight. The aircraft's systems were fully operational, and the crew followed established procedures, confirming altitude, heading, and fuel reserves. Radios were tested multiple times, and navigation instruments were cross-checked with charts. In these early moments, there was nothing to suggest the disappearance that would soon render the routine communication a haunting relic of vanished human presence, leaving investigators decades later to wonder how such a well-equipped flight could simply vanish. Captain John W. Thompson and his co-pilot monitored instruments with methodical attention, each gauge and dial affirming the aircraft's proper function as the passengers settled into their seats. Flight engineers checked radio frequencies, ensuring continuous contact with Bermuda Control, and frequently reviewed readings from the engines and altimeters. The navigator carefully compared the aircraft's position with planned waypoints, ensuring the path remained true across open water. Passengers engaged in quiet conversation, reading or observing the serene sky beyond the cabin windows, unaware of the fragile line of connection to the ground that their routine communication had just established. Clear skies stretched above the Atlantic, offering no turbulence, no storm, and no hint of the disappearance that would soon confound investigators and authorities alike. Sunlight reflected from polished surfaces within the cabin, bouncing across dials, instruments, and chart tables. The aircraft moved steadily through high-altitude currents, and though conditions were ideal for smooth flight, the open water below provided no visual reference for estimating distance or confirming the aircraft's track. In this environment, the absence of danger paradoxically amplified the sense of unease, for the disappearance would occur with no observable cause. The last radio communication, brief and procedural, concluded without incident, yet when silence followed, it transformed from a routine check into an enigmatic final signal. The message included confirmation of altitude, heading, and estimated time of arrival, all consistent with the flight plan. Controllers and nearby flights recorded the signal's clarity, noting its normalcy. Minutes later, The station attempted to contact the aircraft again, but there was only static. That moment, unremarkable at the time, became the defining marker of the star Ariel's vanishing, a fleeting human presence frozen in a broadcast that would never be answered. Air traffic personnel logged the absence immediately, recording repeated attempts to reach the aircraft and initiating search procedures with measured urgency. Observers coordinated with regional stations, verifying reports and calling on other flights to listen for any signal. As hours passed, concern intensified. Flight plans were compared to expected time intervals, and communications were sent to ships and planes along potential search corridors. The methodical, procedural steps of the Aviation Authority underscored both the normalcy of operations and the unsettling reality that, in a matter of minutes, a fully functional aircraft had disappeared from contact. Search planes and naval vessels combed the designated flight path, their crews scanning steadily but encountering only the calm, unbroken surface of the Atlantic. Coordinated grids covered hundreds of square miles, with multiple aircraft and ships working in overlapping zones to increase the probability of detection. Debris or signs of wreckage were absent. Currents and winds complicated calculations, leaving the potential crash site uncertain. Every hour without results emphasized the impossibility of locating the star Ariel with conventional means and demonstrated how even systematic searches could fail against the combination of scale, timing, and nature's indifference. Investigators reviewed maintenance records, navigational charts, and meteorological data, finding no anomaly sufficient to explain why the aircraft vanished without a trace. Engine inspections, radio logs, and fuel calculations all indicated the aircraft was fully capable of completing the journey. Crew experience, familiarity with the route, and prior flight history were carefully analysed. Yet no single factor offered a plausible explanation. The routine final transmission, precise and unremarkable at the time, remained the only tangible evidence of the aircraft's last known location, heightening the mystery rather than resolving it. In aviation history, the star Ariel's disappearance became a somber example of the limits of technology, influencing future transatlantic flight protocols and safety regulations. Airlines implemented enhanced navigation checks, improved radio communication procedures, and mandatory position reports at shorter intervals. Safety training incorporated lessons from the flight, emphasizing that even routine conditions could not guarantee security. The haunting absence of the aircraft and the brevity of its final communication ensured that the mystery would remain central to early post-war commercial aviation law, illustrating that no system could fully overcome the unknown. The ocean appeared tranquil from above, yet the absence of wreckage or signal created an unsettling contrast that deepened the mystery surrounding the aircraft's fate. Observers noted the dissonance between the calm, clear skies and the abrupt termination of communication. The vast reflective surface below carried no evidence, while the aircraft's path, once precisely plotted, dissolved into uncertainty. Even decades later, researchers regard the lack of tangible traces as remarkable. The juxtaposition of a perfectly ordinary, uneventful flight and the sudden disappearance continues to challenge expectations about what can happen when routine meets inexplicable circumstance. Decades later, the final transmission remains a singular and haunting artifact, a reminder of human vulnerability when routine journeys collide with inexplicable disappearance. Histories, aviation journals, and safety studies continue to cite the star Ariel as a lesson in both procedural diligence and human limitation. The abruptness of its vanishing, recorded in an ordinary broadcast, reinforces the tension between predictability and the unknowable. That single final communication persists as the only real connection to the crew, an enduring symbol of absence where presence was once confirmed. Even under the clearest skies, the star Ariel's last broadcast lingers as a ghostly presence, unanswered and unclaimed by time or tide. The BSAA Flight 166 Stardust and the word STENDEC, 1947. On the night of February 2, 1947, BSAA Flight 166 rose smoothly from Buenos Aires, and its ordinary radio check would soon transform into an enduring puzzle of unexplained disappearance. The Avro Lancastrian, named Stardust, carried 13 passengers and 5 crew members across the South American skies, bound for Santiago, Chile. Routine procedures guided the flight: pre-flight checks, instrument verification, and confirmation of the planned route. Even the night sky offered nothing unusual, the stars tracing familiar constellations for navigators. Yet, in the hours that followed, what began as a routine communication would become a singular cryptic link to an aircraft that vanished without warning. Captain Reginald Cook and his co-pilot oversaw the Avro Lancastrian with meticulous precision, cross-referencing instruments and charts as the aircraft climbed into the darkened South American sky. Every gauge, every dial, confirmed that engines were performing optimally, that the cabin remained pressurized, and that navigation indicators reflected the planned course. The crew maintained calm professionalism, noting minor adjustments in heading and altitude with practiced care. Passengers were unaware of anything unusual, reading, talking quietly, or observing the lights below. From within the aircraft, nothing foreshadowed the mystery that would soon eclipse all normal flight expectations. The air remained calm and visibility clear, with only faint cloud cover, offering no natural threat to the flight and only heightening the enigma of what would follow. There were no storms on radar, no turbulent currents to buffet the plane, and no reports from other flights along the route indicating anomalies. The serene conditions made the subsequent disappearance all the more puzzling. In clear skies and favourable weather, a well-maintained aircraft simply vanished, leaving only one brief communication to mark its passage through the night. The ordinary nature of the flight, juxtaposed with its sudden disappearance, became central to the enduring intrigue of the case. The final transmission reached Santiago Air Traffic Control precisely on schedule, routine in structure yet ending with the cryptic, now famous word, STENDEC, an anomaly that would confound experts for decades. The message was brief, indicating altitude, heading, and estimated time of the arrival. Then came the mysterious letters, typed or spoken over radio waves, the meaning of which has never been conclusively determined. This single signal, normal in procedure yet utterly perplexing in content, became the sole point of contact from the Stardust before it vanished, an enigmatic reminder that technology can sometimes broadcast a puzzle rather than a warning. Controllers immediately logged the message and attempted repeated contact, but the silence that followed replaced the ordinary reassurance of communication with an unshakable tension. Each repeated call returned only static. Personnel at the tower checked instruments, confirmed frequencies, and coordinated with other regional stations, yet nothing was detected. The ordinary expectation that a flight will respond to radio contact evaporated, leaving a void in both procedural certainty and human understanding. What had been routine minutes before had now transformed into a mystery-challenging logic and procedure alike. Searches began at once, with aircraft and ships tracing the projected path, yet the combination of rugged terrain, vast skies, and limited technology yielded no trace of the aircraft or its passengers. Air crews combed the Andes foothills and extended coastal areas, while naval vessels charted offshore regions in overlapping grids. Despite extensive efforts, no debris, oil slicks, or fragments of the aircraft were ever located. The scope of the search underscored the difficulty of tracing a vanished aircraft over open terrain, and the vastness of the region only deepened the sense of finality surrounding the Stardust disappearance. Maintenance logs, navigational procedures, and meteorological reports were examined thoroughly, revealing no mechanical fault or environmental explanation that could account for the abrupt vanishing. Engines had been serviced according to specifications, and all navigational instruments were verified as fully functional. Weather reports indicated calm conditions, and there was no evidence of pilot error. Investigators were left with the final transmission as the only concrete clue. Even decades later, the aircraft's disappearance, coupled with the cryptic last message, continues to defy conventional explanation, highlighting the limitations of human understanding against the unknown. Within aviation history, Flight 166 became a case study in post-war air travel, demonstrating both the limits of technology and the enduring fascination of a cryptic, unexplained signal. The Stardust incident led to heightened attention on flight communications, navigational redundancy, and rigorous radio protocol. Historians and pilots alike studied the flight to better understand how an aircraft, crew, and passengers could vanish without a trace. Yet despite these lessons, the word STENDEC remains as enigmatic today as it was the night it was sent, a stark reminder that even precise systems can leave questions unanswered. Even as decades passed, the word STENDEC persisted in discussions and research. representing a silent voice from the vanished flight that refused to divulge its secrets. Scholars, enthusiasts, and cryptographers have proposed theories ranging from typographical error to coded distress, but no interpretation has been definitively verified. In this way, the message has outlasted its own context, becoming a symbol of human curiosity and the enduring allure of mysteries that resist resolution. The aircraft itself may be lost, but the transmission preserves a ghostly echo of its journey. Historians and aviation enthusiasts alike continue to scrutinize the disappearance, aware that the final transmission remains the only concrete evidence of Flight 166's existence and final position. Archival records, logs, and witness accounts all converge on a single moment in time, the Stardust crossing the night sky and broadcasting its enigmatic final word. For decades, this singular broadcast has provided both a tangible connection and a profound sense of absence, challenging the expectation that every journey leaves a trace. Its legacy endures as a cautionary tale and a symbol of aviation's mysteries. The cryptic letters of the last transmission float through history like a message in a bottle, unanswered yet impossible to forget. The French submarine Minerve's distress signal, 1968. The Minerve slipped silently through the Mediterranean waters, its crew unaware that the distress signal they would send that night would become the vessel's only trace. Departing from Toulon for a routine patrol, the Daphne-class submarine carried 52 officers and sailors, each performing their duties with the precision expected of Cold War-era naval operations. Instruments hummed steadily, ballast tanks were carefully monitored, and sonar systems scanned the surrounding waters for any sign of nearby vessels. Yet, in the hours that followed, what began as an ordinary mission would be marked by a fleeting enigmatic signal, a human voice that vanished into the depths and left no trace of the submarine itself. Lieutenant Jean-Louis Michel and his officers monitored gauges, sonar readings, and ballast systems with practiced vigilance, navigating a vessel designed for silent precision. Every crew member understood the delicate balance of pressure, temperature, and engine output necessary to maintain underwater stability. The captain carefully plotted the patrol route along the French continental shelf, coordinating depth changes and maneuvers with the engineering team. Even routine drills were executed with meticulous care, the echo of each footstep and the soft hum of machinery amplified in the narrow metal corridors, emphasizing the fragile equilibrium of life within the submarine's hull. The interior was a maze of narrow corridors, humming machinery and blinking instruments, where every sound, every sonar ping or engine vibration took on heightened significance in the isolation of the deep. Communication between compartments was constant but subdued, as any loud noise could mask an important signal or mislead the sonar readings. Crew members conducted checks on emergency systems, aware that at depth even minor malfunctions could escalate rapidly. The submarine's walls seemed both protective and confining, containing an invisible tension that the crew carried with them as they moved quietly through their routines, unaware that the calm would soon be shattered by an unanticipated warning. The distress transmission arrived without warning, succinct and unmistakable, a fleeting communication that would stand as the final human voice from the Minerva before it disappeared from detection. The signal, brief and fragmented, conveyed urgency but did not explain, cutting off mid-sentence as if swallowed by the very waters that surrounded the vessel. It was the first and only indication that the submarine was in danger, a stark interruption in a routine patrol. For the operators at Toulon, the sudden transmission defied expectation, transforming an ordinary evening into a puzzle that would haunt naval communications for decades. Naval Command in Toulon immediately initiated coordinated procedures, alerting nearby ships and aircraft while compiling every detail from the last known position of the submarine. Officers calculated the vessel's possible trajectories, taking into account speed, depth, and fuel reserves, while communications officers attempted repeated contact, receiving only silence in response. Orders were sent to deploy search groups in sectors surrounding the submarine's expected route. Tension grew with each passing hour. The normal rhythm of patrol work was replaced by the urgent need to locate a vessel that had become invisible beneath the ocean's surface. Search operations began in earnest, with surface vessels, sonar sweeps, and underwater detection technology scouring the surrounding seafloor, yet the Minerve left no debris, no oil trace, and no clues to guide them. Ships fanned out along grid patterns, while divers and remotely operated vehicles combed known wreck sites. Currents and underwater topography complicated every sweep, masking even the faintest evidence of a catastrophe. Days turned into weeks without a single discovery, each failed attempt magnifying the mystery of a submarine equipped with the most sophisticated tracking and emergency systems of its era, yet vanished without a trace. Investigators examined maintenance logs, operational procedures, and crew records, uncovering nothing that could definitively explain the sudden disappearance or the cryptic distress signal. The submarine had undergone regular inspections, engines and ballast systems were reported in excellent condition, and the crew's performance history was impeccable. Even the briefest known communications did not reveal a specific emergency. Experts debated possible scenarios, from underwater collision to catastrophic mechanical failure, but all remained speculative. The only confirmed element was the final transmission, a ghostly human footprint in a vast, unforgiving environment. Set against the tensions and technological ambitions of the Cold War, the Minerve incident underscored the vulnerabilities of even the most sophisticated naval vessels when faced with the unknown depths of the ocean. Submarines were increasingly complex, yet they remained dependent on human decision-making, fragile mechanical systems, and limited real-time monitoring. The disappearance highlighted the balance between technological confidence and the uncontrollable nature of the underwater realm. For those on the surface, the sea concealed its secrets completely, holding both vessel and crew in an invisible, impenetrable grip. For decades, naval historians and oceanographers have revisited the case, drawn to the stark contrast between the submarine's technological capability and the complete absence of tangible evidence. Papers, reports, and sonar maps have been analysed repeatedly, and the incident continues to serve as a cautionary tale for modern naval operations. The distress signal remains the only definitive record of the Minerva's final moments, a reminder that even in an age of precision engineering, uncertainty can overwhelm certainty. Researchers continue to speculate, but the truth of what occurred remains locked beneath the Mediterranean waves. The distress signal remains the only concrete connection to the vessel, a lone message that preserves the final human trace in a sea that has claimed its crew without explanation. Every other aspect of the Minerve, its hull, its machinery, its patrol plans, exists only in archives and recollection, leaving the final transmission as a haunting testament to the lives aboard. Generations of submariners and scholars have been drawn to this singular communication, aware that it is both evidence and enigma, a link between human endeavour and the vast, unknowable deep. The Minerve's last call drifts through the depths of history, a voice trapped between ocean and silence, unanswered yet impossible to ignore. USS Scorpion's final Atlantic signal, 1968. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, a shifting expanse of grey currents and rolling silence, concealing the USS Scorpion as it moved through the deep, its presence known only through instruments and fleeting radio contact. Grey clouds hung low over the waves, and the faint reflection of sunlight barely penetrated the rolling surface, emphasizing the ocean's boundless indifference to what stirred below. The Skipjack-class nuclear-powered submarine carried 99 officers and sailors, each performing duties within a confined metallic labyrinth designed for stealth and precision. Its mission, a routine return from Mediterranean deployment, followed carefully plotted waypoints, yet the ocean around it seemed to absorb the vessel into its vastness. In the stillness of May 1968, no one could foresee that the crew's final communication would become their only trace in history. Inside the hull, officers and sailors carried out familiar routines, balancing reactor output, sonar sweeps, and watch rotations with disciplined precision, unaware that ordinary patrol would soon be disrupted forever. The control room hummed with the quiet resonance of nuclear power and electrical circuits, punctuated only by sonar pings and muffled footfalls along narrow corridors. The captain moved among the crew, reviewing charts, cross-referencing instruments, and ensuring each duty was executed without error. Below the waves, time seemed slower and heavier, each measured action amplified in the silence that surrounded them, a rhythm that would abruptly be broken. Small anomalies began to register, irregular sonar echoes and momentary fluctuations in system readings, brief enough to be dismissed yet lingering in the minds of those who noticed them. A faint pause in the sonar operator's rhythm drew glances from nearby sailors, a quiet acknowledgement that the ocean held secrets even for those trained to read its signals. An unexplained shadow on the sonar screen, a subtle variation in water pressure, a fleeting noise from the ballast system. Each instance was minor in isolation, but collectively they hinted at an invisible uncertainty. Crew members discussed the irregularities quietly, attributing them to natural oceanic conditions or technical quirks. The final radio signal cut through the routine without warning, brief and unelaborated, instantly transforming normal operations into a mystery that would never be solved from within the vessel. It reached naval command centres far above, a stark interruption in an otherwise routine patrol. Nothing in the transmission revealed distress or specific circumstances, only the undeniable fact that the USS Scorpion existed and was now at risk. The sudden silence that followed was absolute, as if the signal had been swallowed immediately after it emerged, leaving behind a void heavier than any depth measured by the vessel's instruments. From naval command centres, triangulation attempts traced the fleeting transmission, while officers coordinated searches across vast, uncharted swaths of the Atlantic, their eyes on instruments that revealed only emptiness. Communication channels were opened, messages relayed to surface vessels and aircraft, and alerts dispatched to Allied naval commands. Every effort relied on calculations, projections, and probability, yet the submarine refused to materialize. The ocean appeared indifferent to the human urgency above, a living void that stretched between the surface and the unknowable deep. Ships and aircraft scoured the waters with methodical determination, sonar sweeps probing the ocean floor. Yet currents and distance swallowed every effort, leaving the submarine invisible and the crew unaccounted for. Planes dipped low, scanning for signs of debris or unusual reflection, while ships conducted grid searches, carefully coordinating sonar frequencies and sweep patterns. Each sonar pulse reverberated against unseen topography, while the whine of ship engines and distant propellers underscored the vast, unyielding expanse they combed. Time passed without revelation. The more sophisticated the technology, the more it seemed to emphasize the absence of the submarine rather than its presence. In the dark expanse, hazards unseen, the thermoclines, underwater ridges, and deep-sea currents turned the Atlantic into an unknowable labyrinth, a hostile environment where even the most sophisticated vessel could vanish. At the crushing depths where the submarine operated, pressure increased with each fathom, and darkness became absolute, rendering human perception nearly irrelevant. The submarine's navigational instruments recorded data meticulously, yet none could account for the hidden forces acting on the vessel at depth. Oceanographers studying the area noted strong vertical currents and intricate seabed topography that could shift debris, distort sonar readings, or conceal even substantial wreckage. Investigators later combed through reactor logs, operational procedures, and patrol reports, uncovering no evidence of mechanical failure, human error, or environmental compromise sufficient to explain the disappearance. Routine checks of propulsion systems, ballast controls, and nuclear power output revealed nothing amiss. Crew records indicated experienced personnel performing duties within expected parameters. Even decades of analysis could not produce a single document or observation to explain the abrupt loss of the submarine. The final radio signal remained the only verified human connection to a crew that had vanished without warning. The absence of the USS Scorpion cast long shadows on naval personnel, families, and historians alike, leaving questions of fate, timing, and the ocean's role to fill the void left by the vanished crew. Families waited for news that would never arrive, while analysts debated scenarios ranging from catastrophic hull failure to a sudden internal explosion, none confirmed by evidence. Briefings, reports, and analytical meetings stretched on for weeks, the tension in the air a quiet reminder that certainty remained forever out of reach. Public reports were limited due to Cold War secrecy, adding to the sense of mystery. Each unanswered question reinforced the haunting presence of the submarine in memory and maritime records, a phantom of human ambition swallowed by the deep. Over the years, the submarine's last signal stands as the solitary trace of life in the Atlantic, a haunting echo in a sea that refuses to reveal its secrets. It is studied, revisited, and cited in naval research and maritime history, but it offers no resolution, only a reminder of the fragility of even the most advanced vessels against the vastness of the ocean. The Atlantic's depths remain indifferent, holding both the Scorpion and its crew in a silence that resists understanding, leaving every observer to confront the limits of human knowledge and technology. The Atlantic holds the Scorpion in its silent depths, a fleeting voice lost to the currents yet impossible to forget. The Witchcraft's calm harbour call, 1967. The harbour lay serene under a soft morning haze, waves lapping against piers as the USS Witchcraft sent out a brief radio call that would become its final known message. Ships rocked gently on their moorings, gulls wheeling overhead, and sunlight reflected softly off the rippling water, creating an almost ordinary scene that belied the events that would follow. On board, crew members performed routine checks and maintenance, the metallic corridors echoing with the steady rhythm of a disciplined activity. The submarine, a Forrest Sherman-class vessel tasked with coastal patrol, moved through the harbour with practiced precision, yet no one sensed the ominous quiet that would soon define its disappearance. In the early hours of May 1967, a routine morning was the last ordinary moment before silence claimed the vessel. On board, the crew moved with measured efficiency, performing drills and checks in the tight metallic corridors, unaware that this day would end in inexplicable silence. Officers reviewed navigational charts, while enlisted sailors monitored engine systems, the controlled environment inside the hull contrasting sharply with the unpredictable nature of the harbour outside. Each valve adjustment, each sonar sweep, was executed with practiced care, a testament to the crew's discipline and experience. The submarine hummed with the quiet energy of nuclear readiness, but beneath the surface of routine a subtle tension lingered, a latent uncertainty that would become starkly apparent within hours. Every corridor and compartment reflected human order, yet the ocean nearby held its own inscrutable rhythm. An unusual clatter of rigging and a slight vibration along the hull drew the watchstander's attention, subtle signals that the ordinary morning might conceal something amiss. Sailors paused, exchanging glances, wondering if the sound originated from shifting mooring lines, mechanical operation, or the unpredictable movement of water against steel. A fleeting hum in the ballast system went unnoticed by most, but lingered in the consciousness of the attentive few, small anomalies that would later be considered ominous. The harbour, usually predictable and familiar, seemed to amplify these minor irregularities, creating a subtle sense of unease that contrasted sharply with the calm of the morning. Yet nothing overtly threatened the vessel as it prepared for departure, and no one could anticipate the abruptness of what was to come. The final transmission emerged suddenly, cutting through routine communications and leaving command centres with only a fleeting, mysterious trace of life. Unlike previous reports, which included course updates or mechanical status, this last radio contact did not explain, merely confirming that the Witchcraft was in motion and then ceasing altogether. Naval operators recorded the brief signal and immediately attempted follow-ups, but no further replies were received. The lack of additional communication transformed a minor anomaly into an enduring enigma. A single confirmed human connection now represented the vessel's entire remaining trace in history. The harbour, once a place of routine activity, became a silent witness to the unknown fate of those aboard. At Naval Command, officers analysed the brief signal, triangulating its source while realising the vessel had vanished from the harbour's familiar waters almost instantly. Charts were consulted, patrol logs reviewed, and radio frequencies scrutinised, yet nothing indicated where the Witchcraft had gone. The harbour, normally alive with the sound of ships, tugboats and loading cranes, seemed to hold its breath, the stillness magnifying the absence of the submarine. Efforts to contact the vessel revealed nothing, leaving a lingering impression of fragility and impermanence. Within hours, the disappearance had become a formal search problem, a mystery layered with both urgency and frustration as naval authorities confronted the limits of their own technology. Rescue boats and patrol craft searched methodically, yet the calm surface offered no clue, and sonar pings returned nothing but reflections of empty water. Aircraft circled overhead, scanning with optical devices and radar for any sign of debris or unusual movement. Every sweep of sonar seemed to confirm the emptiness beneath the tranquil waves, as if the submarine had simply melted into the harbour without a trace. Crews reported occasional echoes or fleeting distortions, yet each anomaly proved inconclusive, swallowed by the complex acoustics of the harbour environment. Hours turned to a day, and the scale of the search expanded, revealing the eerie contrast between the peaceful setting and the profound absence below. Hidden channels, sudden drop-offs, and shifting currents turned the harbour into an unpredictable trap, a reminder that even shallow waters could conceal danger. The ocean floor was far from uniform. Sandbanks, submerged pilings, and natural depressions created a landscape invisible to casual observation. Naval engineers noted that the currents could move swiftly and irregularly, capable of shifting floating debris or disorienting vessels that relied on sonar readings. In these deceptively gentle waters, every precaution seemed insufficient, reinforcing the unsettling notion that even a harbour, a place meant for safety and routine, could become a labyrinth from which escape was impossible. Investigators later reviewed engine logs, navigation records, and crew reports, finding no explanation for the disappearance and only reinforcing the haunting nature of the last message. Routine maintenance checks, propulsion readings, and navigational markers showed no faults or operational failures. Crew logs indicated normal behaviour, and nothing suggested panic or error. The lack of evidence became part of the mystery itself. The Witchcraft had vanished in full operational order, leaving behind only the final radio signal to hint at its presence. Analysts and historians alike would repeatedly return to that brief transmission, each reading raising as many questions as it answered. Families, colleagues, and historians wrestled with the uncertainty, the disappearance turning a routine patrol into a lingering enigma, its clarity forever framed by the final radio signal. Loved ones waited for news that would never come, while naval historians combed archives and declassified materials for any overlooked detail. Public reports were limited, and speculation filled the void left by secrecy, yet no consensus emerged. Each attempt to reconstruct the event highlighted the unpredictability of both the sea and human activity, and the calm harbour that had welcomed the Witchcraft in the morning now seemed to mock the inability of anyone to understand what had occurred. Time has done little to dim the mystery, as the harbour's calm surface continues to mask the enigma that swallowed the Witchcraft without a trace. Visitors passing the docks often see the ordinary bustle of boats, the glint of sunlight on water, and the familiar rhythm of coastal life, entirely unaware of the vanishing that occurred decades ago. Scholars revisit reports, search for comparative incidents, and examine the final radio transmission for hidden clues, yet the fundamental question remains unanswered. What became of the vessel and her crew? The harbour holds the memory, but the answers lie stubbornly out of reach, contained in silence as profound as the sea itself. A single transmission lingers in memory, its calm clarity only deepening the haunting mystery of the Witchcraft's vanishing. The Carroll A.'s ghostly silence, 1921. The Carroll A. set sail from Boston in 1921, a 5-masted schooner bound for the Caribbean, carrying cargo, crew, and the promise of routine trade across the Atlantic. Its hull gleamed under the spring sun, polished to withstand months at sea, and the sails were trimmed precisely for maximum efficiency. The captain and officers reviewed charts while sailors adjusted rigging and checked provisions, performing tasks that had been drilled countless times before. Onlookers at the dock waved goodbye, unaware that the vessel would soon enter maritime legend. The journey began with the ordinary rhythm of trade, yet the Atlantic, vast and indifferent, held secrets that would turn the mundane into the mysterious. With decks meticulously maintained and rigging taut, the vessel cut through the waves under a skilled captain, her crew trained for long voyages and the subtle dangers of open ocean travel. Life aboard was disciplined but routine, each sailor aware of the ship's complex machinery and the necessity of coordination in daily manoeuvres. The schooner's design allowed for steady passage even in unpredictable conditions, and the crew moved with a quiet efficiency that suggested confidence in both vessel and journey. Conversations among officers occasionally touched on navigation, cargo, and weather, yet there was no indication that these discussions would be the last heard from them. The ship appeared to follow its intended path, unremarkable yet steadfast. Throughout the early weeks, the ship's log recorded nothing unusual. Fair winds, routine course adjustments, and the quiet rhythm of life at sea, all signalling an ordinary passage. Days were filled with maintenance, observation, and small moments of camaraderie as the crew tended to sails and lines. Nightfall brought the usual rotation of watch shifts, the officers scanning the horizon for signs of ships or hazards. The Atlantic stretched endlessly in all directions, a steady companion to disciplined human activity. At this stage, nothing suggested danger, and each log entry painted a picture of calm and controlled motion, a ship performing exactly as intended on a predictable voyage. Yet somewhere along the mid-Atlantic stretch, communications ceased in a way that would later become chilling, the vessel sending only a brief final radio message whose mystery persists to this day. This transmission, unlike the routine updates before it, offered no detail, no indication of distress, and no explanation for what might have been happening aboard. Naval authorities and maritime observers later analysed the faint signals, but they revealed only that the ship was moving as expected at the time of contact. The absence of subsequent transmissions left a vacuum of information, turning a single brief signal into an enduring enigma. The Atlantic had claimed its silence, and the schooner's ordinary voyage became an unsolved riddle. Months later, the schooner was discovered near the Outer Banks, drifting silently, sails slack and lifeboats in place, with not a single crew member to explain the circumstances of their disappearance. Observers noted the ship's intact condition, no evidence of struggle, damage or mechanical failure, and yet the human presence silently absent. The surrounding waters were calm, as if the Atlantic itself preserved the vessel as a tableau of mystery. Seabirds circled overhead, indifferent to the anomaly below, and the quiet morning amplified the unsettling sense of abandonment. Those first to approach the ship described an almost surreal sensation, as if stepping into a scene frozen in time. Boarding parties explored the ship cautiously, noting logs open as if abandoned mid-entry, personal belongings untouched, and instruments calibrated with meticulous care, a scene that suggested sudden departure. Tools were in place, meals uneaten, and navigational charts spread across tables, as though the crew had been interrupted in routine tasks. Not a single note, scrap of paper, or sign of panic was discovered, leaving investigators and seafarers alike to grapple with the strangeness of the schooner's condition. Every detail reinforced the idea that the disappearance had been abrupt, complete, and inexplicable, a human void cast against the predictable mechanics of the vessel. Ocean currents, shifting tides, and occasional storms were examined as possible explanations, yet no natural phenomenon could account for a fully intact vessel with no signs of struggle. Coastal experts considered whirlpools, rogue waves, and hidden shoals, but each factor failed to reconcile the absence of the crew. The schooner's course, reconstructed from sparse records and sightings, suggested it had followed normal shipping lanes without veering into hazardous areas. Even when accounting for seasonal Atlantic storms, the ship's condition was inexplicably pristine, preserved against the chaos of nature. Every element of the environment seemed incapable of explaining the final state of the Carroll A Deering. Authorities explored theories of mutiny, piracy, and disease, but each hypothesis faltered under the stark evidence. A ghostly schooner carrying the trace of life without its people. Mutiny would have left signs of conflict or damage. Piracy would have taken cargo or sabotaged the vessel. Illness or sudden incapacitation remained possible, but unlikely, given the crew's training and size. Yet the schooner floated, intact and untouched, with only a faint record of a final radio signal hinting at human activity. The contradiction between the ship's ordinary appearance and the extraordinary vanishing of its crew created a narrative that would endure in maritime lore. Over time, the Carroll A Deering's fate entered maritime legend, haunting sailors, historians, and coastal communities with the image of a ship that seemed suspended between routine passage and permanent disappearance. Tales of the ghost ship circulated in ports along the eastern seaboard, blending eyewitness accounts with speculation and embellishment. The schooner's brief, enigmatic radio communication was repeatedly referenced, a single trace of connection to the crew's final moments. Its empty decks became a symbol of human vulnerability and the ocean's unknowable power, inspiring both awe and unease among those who considered the Atlantic's hidden depths. Every document, Coast Guard report, and newspaper account leaves unanswered questions, the schooner's silent decks serving as a permanent reminder of a voyage that ended without explanation. Scholars revisited the logs, checked dates, and analysed weather patterns, yet the mystery remained unresolved. Each investigation seemed to deepen the sense of enigma, as if the Atlantic had deliberately preserved only the barest record of the ship's passage. The Carroll A Deering became more than a vessel. it became a story of absence, a floating testament to the human inability to account for what vanishes without a trace. Even today, the Atlantic stretches endlessly around the ghost ship's empty decks, as if holding its secrets in suspension. The schooner's image, preserved in photographs and eyewitness accounts, continues to captivate and unsettle, a reminder that some maritime mysteries resist resolution. The final radio transmission remains the only confirmed echo of human presence, a fleeting connection to a crew that disappeared without explanation. Mariners passing the area report an eerie stillness, a subtle tension in the waters, as if the ocean itself guards the truth of the Carroll A. Deering. The Atlantic keeps its secrets well, and the Carroll A. Deering's last message remains a phantom echo that refuses to be explained. The Amelia Earhart transmission from the Pacific, 1937. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath the Lockheed Electra, its blue expanse shimmering under the morning sun, seemingly infinite and indifferent. Amelia Earhart and co-pilot Fred Noonan traced a precise flight path, relying on instruments, charts, and celestial observations to guide them over thousands of miles of open water. Waves reflected light in dazzling patterns, while currents shifted invisibly beneath the surface, reminding the crew that every mile carried inherent risk. The hum of engines and occasional crackle of the radio filled the cockpit, bridging the immense isolation with fleeting contact to the world left behind. Every glance at the horizon amplified the tension. Charts, compasses, and navigational instruments consumed the crew's attention. Each minor deviation scrutinized and corrected. Fuel consumption, wind drift, and speed required constant calculation, a delicate balance between planning and nature's unpredictability. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, subtle shifts hinting at sudden weather changes that could disrupt headings. Radio transmissions offered intermittent reassurance but disappeared into static across the vast ocean. Even routine tasks demanded vigilance, as human error or mechanical failure could prove fatal far from land. The Electra's small silhouette carried both hope and fragility, a testament to courage confronting the immensity of the Pacific. The crew pressed onward, measured, deliberate. Hours of flight stretched into isolation, punctuated by faint radio updates that marked progress yet revealed little. Islands appeared briefly on the horizon, too small to provide certainty, reminding the crew of their vulnerability. Instruments recorded headings and winds, minor anomalies noted, but often meaningless on the ocean's scale. Even minor shifts in currents could carry consequences far larger than anticipated. Communication with ground stations flickered, signals rising and fading, a tenuous lifeline. Every mile required careful attention to maintain course and safety. The ocean's expanse created a paradox of beauty and menace, where achievement and danger were inseparable companions. The Electra's journey pressed onward across solitude. Subtle changes in sky and air hinted at the approaching moment when the final mysterious transmission would emerge. Clouds thickened and light shifted, complicating navigation despite meticulous preparation. Radio messages continued but grew more infrequent, each one a fragile thread linking crew and observers. The brevity and timing of the final signal heightened its significance, a last mark of human presence in a vast expanse. Analysts would later reconstruct possible paths using logs, meteorological charts, and drift estimates, yet uncertainty persisted. The final transmission became a haunting reminder that skill and courage cannot fully tame nature. Its mystery lingered across miles of empty ocean. Ground teams tracked the flight with growing concern, dispatching ships and aircraft along the Electra's projected path. Despite careful plotting, the ocean revealed nothing. No debris, no signs of forced landing. Occasional signals hinted at presence, then dissolved into static, leaving no confirmation. Observers scanned for islands, flares, or floating wreckage, but all efforts returned empty. Minor sightings and reports circulated, yet none were verified. Investigators faced a blank expanse that resisted explanation, turning the flight into a riddle. Each search emphasized the Pacific's immensity and unpredictability. The disappearance became both a tragedy and an enduring enigma, as vast as the waters themselves. Currents, reefs, and sudden squalls compounded the hazards of flight, yet no combination fully accounted for the vanishing. Even precise navigation could not counter invisible threats. each minor miscalculation magnified by distance. Meteorological reconstructions offered possibilities but no certainty. Weather fronts, minor instrument errors, and mechanical variables all interacted within a space too immense for complete understanding. Records and reports were scrutinized repeatedly, revealing patterns but never a definitive conclusion. The Electra's fate remained beyond reconstruction. The ocean preserved its secrets, a realm where human endeavor met forces that refused complete comprehension, leaving only conjecture in the place of clarity. Mechanical concerns, navigational adjustments, and weather anomalies were considered exhaustively, yet explanations met the same frustration: silence. Earhart's experience and preparation suggested that pilot error was unlikely, and Noonan's expertise reinforced confidence in navigation. Yet even with skill, factors beyond control could emerge suddenly. Investigators combed reports and logs, only to encounter gaps that offered no resolution. The final radio transmission stood as the most compelling trace, brief and unresolved. Its brevity underscored the Electra's vulnerability in a vast, unyielding environment. The Pacific remained a place of both awe and danger, where ambition met uncertainty in every mile flown. Public fascination intensified as news reports, radio programs, and correspondence chronicled the disappearance in real time. Each retelling emphasized Earhart's pioneering role and the haunting absence following her last transmission. The brevity of the signal became emblematic, a ghostly trace marking the point where human daring met the unknowable. Admirers and researchers analyzed every detail, amplifying the mystery and cementing it in the public imagination. Stories of flares, distant sightings, and fleeting signals circulated, yet none offered closure. The Electra's journey became legend, a case study in courage and vulnerability alike. The final transmission endured as both fact and symbol, a slender thread across the void. Archival logs, weather charts, and navigational notes offered fragments of the flight, yet the mystery persisted. Every analysis returned to the same puzzle. The Electra's ultimate location and fate remained elusive. Signals intercepted suggested presence in the corridor, yet no verification emerged. Currents, wind patterns, and drift simulations could only propose scenarios, leaving questions unanswered. Each investigation highlighted the limits of human understanding against the vast ocean. The final transmission persisted as the most concrete trace, brief and enigmatic. The Pacific's immensity absorbed evidence and memory alike, preserving silence where a plane and crew once existed. Many years later, the Electra's disappearance remains a defining enigma of aviation history. Researchers, pilots, and enthusiasts continue to study meteorology, currents, and flight plans, yet the final moments remain uncertain. The Pacific's scale and power continue to frustrate attempts at explanation. Every signal recorded, every chart plotted, underscores human vulnerability against vast, indifferent nature. The mystery endures as a symbol of daring, ambition, and the limits of certainty. The final transmission exists in records and imagination alike, a ghostly marker of courage lost to the waves. The last faint radio signals drifted across the Pacific, a ghostly trace of a flight that vanished without a sound. The Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571's fading contact, 1972. Snow-capped ridges rose like jagged teeth, a labyrinth that Flight 571 had to navigate with only instruments and instinct. The twin-engine Fairchild FH-227D carried passengers and crew across the Andes, an environment both unforgiving and unpredictable. Visibility was limited, clouds clinging to the mountain flanks, and the peaks themselves seemed to shift beneath the plane's wings. As altitude climbed, the air thinned, engines strained, and every course correction demanded precision. The remote stretches below offered no margin for error, while radio contact remained intermittent, a fragile lifeline to those watching from afar. The mountains demanded respect, and Flight 571's journey was already defined by uncertainty. Pilots monitored gauges and altimeters with relentless focus, aware that a minor miscalculation could turn progress into peril. They navigated by dead reckoning, measuring drift against winds that howled unpredictably through narrow passes. Clouds and snowfall blurred visual references, leaving only instrumentation and experience as guides. Cabin pressure and temperature fluctuated, each adjustment critical to maintaining altitude and stability. Crew members exchanged concise procedural communications, their calm tone concealing awareness of the risks. Even small variations in airspeed or heading could lead the aircraft off course. In this vast, icy corridor, the mountains were both barrier and beacon, unforgiving yet necessary for the flight's survival. Winds shifted unpredictably, whipping through narrow passes and concealing the horizon in swirling ice and cloud. Each gust pushed the aircraft into precarious angles, forcing constant adjustments to prevent drift toward the sheer faces of cliffs. Snow and ice reduced lift, while the treacherous terrain below offered no safe landing spots. The combination of altitude, weather, and weight challenged every pilot's calculation. Communication with air traffic control and regional stations became increasingly strained, relying on shortwave bursts that barely penetrated the storm. Flight 571 moved through this frozen expanse like a fragile thread, the mountains closing around it as though testing the resolve of every person aboard. For fleeting moments, the radio came alive with a faint trembling signal that hinted at presence yet confirmed nothing. Ground operators intercepted bursts of static and broken transmissions that carried no coherent message, only the assurance that someone, somewhere, was still aloft. Each pulse offered hope tempered by anxiety, the intermittent contact a stark reminder of isolation. Investigators later would attempt to reconstruct the timing and content of these signals, yet the sparse data only deepened the mystery. The fading transmissions became the defining trace of Flight 571, the ephemeral tether between the aircraft and the world, a signal that would vanish long before answers could arrive. Ice-laden cliffs and hidden valleys transformed the Andes into a landscape both breathtaking and merciless. Jagged rocks jutted through snowfields, and avalanche-prone slopes challenged the safest routes. The plane's navigation was complicated by sudden changes in air density and temperature inversions, invisible hazards that instruments hinted at but could not fully reveal. Shadows from peaks shifted with the low sun, creating optical illusions and further disorienting the crew. Even experienced pilots found themselves in constant vigilance, balancing the need for speed with the imperative of survival. Every twist of the flight path intersected with natural obstacles that magnified the fragility of human presence in the mountains. Ground teams combed distant peaks and snowfields, scanning for the aircraft while only silence met their eyes. The fading contact had prompted a coordinated response, yet the terrain limited both visibility and accessibility. Helicopters struggled against high winds, and search parties on foot were slowed by deep snow and hidden crevasses. Communications with the aircraft provided no clarity, only intermittent bursts that hinted at location without certainty. Weather forecasts predicted worsening conditions, complicating rescue planning. As hours became days, the mountains seemed to stretch endlessly, each valley concealing secrets and every ridge presenting a new challenge. The fading signal remained the sole indication of Flight 571's trajectory. Passengers and crew adjusted to the tension with quiet vigilance, sensing the growing distance between safety and disaster. Fear and endurance coexisted silently in the cabin, with individuals relying on routine and discipline to stave off panic. Observing the icy peaks below through narrow windows, the weight of isolation pressed upon every mind. The intermittent radio transmissions offered fleeting reassurance, though their brevity heightened anxiety. Survival depended not only on navigation, but on mental resilience, the ability to maintain focus amid uncertainty. Every mile crossed felt both triumphant and perilous, with the mountains as an omnipresent witness to human vulnerability. Analysts later reconstructed flight paths, meteorological conditions, and signal strength, yet the final transmission refused explanation. Data suggested the aircraft maintained course longer than expected, and yet the abrupt disappearance puzzled experts. Some signals appeared to indicate altitude adjustments or minor course corrections, but the overall sequence could not predict the fate of the plane. Investigators struggled to reconcile technical records with environmental realities, emphasizing how the fading contact itself had become the defining mystery. Even decades later, the precise location and timing of the final burst remained uncertain, a ghostly trace that defied conventional reasoning. Snowdrifts and rocky outcrops preserved fragments of the journey, but these remnants offered no clarity about the fading contact. debris and personal effects revealed glimpses of the passengers' experience, but could not convey the full narrative. Mountaineers and search teams pieced together evidence, noting patterns of impact and drift across glaciers. The Andes' vastness swallowed context along with the plane, leaving investigators to rely on partial information and inference. Each discovery prompted further questions. How far had the plane travelled, and how did the final radio burst relate to its position? The mountains themselves seemed complicit in maintaining the secret, an immutable record of absence. At present, the peaks still seemed to guard the secrets of Flight 571, swallowing the aircraft and its fleeting radio messages. The story persisted in reports, archives, and memory, each retelling highlighting the tension between human ambition and natural power. Researchers and historians revisited maps and signals, seeking patterns that might explain what had happened in the silent, frozen corridors. Time amplified the enigma, and the fading transmissions remained central to the narrative. Their brief existence in the ether marked the boundary between known and unknown, a reminder of how fragile contact can be when humans traverse vast, indifferent landscapes. The Andes held their answer, just beyond reach. The last trembling transmission dissolved into the Andes, leaving only a spectral echo where a plane once defied the mountains. The SS Ourang Medan's chilling SOS, 1947. A dense fog settled over the Malacca Strait, swallowing the outlines of distant vessels and leaving the SS Ourang Medan shrouded in an uneasy stillness that hinted at hidden danger. The freighter had departed from its scheduled route with little fanfare, carrying cargo and crew across familiar waters, yet something seemed amiss that night. Passing ships' radio operators began to detect fragmented signals, faint and irregular, that suggested a problem on board. Even before the first SOS call reached them, sailors described a feeling of unease, as if the freighter carried a secret they were not meant to witness. The surrounding waters seemed unnervingly quiet, amplifying the foreboding atmosphere as the Ourang Medan sailed on. Crews aboard neighbouring ships picked up faint, fragmented signals that seemed to rise from nowhere, carrying a sense of urgency without revealing a clear source. Operators struggled to distinguish static from human voice as the freighter's transmission crackled unpredictably across the radio waves. Observers reported subtle disturbances in the fog, glimmers of lights too far to identify, and the occasional outline of a moving figure on deck. Every message, though indecipherable, conveyed a growing tension, hinting at peril lurking just beyond the veil of night. While the ship remained invisible, its presence was undeniable, each signal heightening the collective apprehension of those who intercepted it. The mysterious SOS transmissions intensified as hours passed, their spectral pulse echoing across radio frequencies and leaving listeners with a growing sense of dread. The calls were sporadic, marked by abrupt silences that seemed almost deliberate, as if the freighter itself had become hesitant to communicate with the outside world. Each fleeting transmission carried with it a weight of uncertainty, and crews struggled to interpret the urgency behind the signals. Ships in proximity attempted to triangulate the freighter's position, yet the fog and irregular transmissions complicated all efforts. By the early morning hours, the Ourang Medan had transformed in reputation from routine freighter to phantom vessel, an enigma cloaked in both mist and mystery. On board, reports described lights flickering in unnatural patterns, shadows moving across decks in ways that defied normal observation, suggesting the presence of an unseen disturbance. Eyewitness accounts from passing vessels suggested the crew may have been frozen in place, or engaged in movements that made little sense to outside observers. Even from a distance, the freighter gave the impression of being occupied yet abandoned, active yet lifeless. Details about the ship's internal conditions remained scarce, but the combination of flickering lights and strange silhouettes fostered speculation about mechanical failure, panic, or something more inexplicable. For mariners monitoring from afar, the Ourang Medan had become an object of growing apprehension, a vessel simultaneously present and intangible. Rescue ships approached cautiously, the sea rising against them, each wave amplifying the tension as the freighter's location became both clearer and more unsettling. As they navigated the foggy waters, sailors reported a sense of being watched, as if the Ourang Medan's predicament radiated outward into the surrounding ocean. Every signal received was met with both hope and apprehension, While the unpredictable currents complicated all attempts to reach the vessel, navigators relied on cautious, painstaking maneuvers, wary of unseen hazards and the freighter's spectral presence. The combination of fog, darkness, and the erratic SOS created a psychological tension aboard the rescuing ships that was as real as any physical threat. Winds shifted suddenly, carrying salty spray in unexpected directions, and the ocean seemed to obscure the vessel's form, as if it were hiding something beyond comprehension. The freighter's outline appeared intermittently through the fog, then vanished again, leaving rescuers disoriented. Each wave seemed to distort sound and light, making the SOS calls appear even more disjointed and mysterious. Mariners documented these occurrences meticulously, but no pattern could explain the vessel's strange behaviour or the increasingly urgent signals. By now, the Ourang Medan had become a focus of fear, speculation, and maritime legend, a ship whose fate teetered between natural disaster and something far less tangible. Maritime investigators later compiled theories ranging from accidental explosions to toxic gases, yet the absence of survivors left every explanation incomplete and haunting. No detailed reports of injuries or mechanical failures were recovered, and the ship itself offered few clues. Each attempt to rationalise the catastrophe met with gaps and contradictions in witness accounts, leaving researchers with only fragments of evidence. Over time, maritime historians have debated every possible scenario, from structural failure to chemical mishaps. But the combination of an urgent SOS and a completely lost crew defies conventional understanding. The Ourang Medan's story persisted, a chilling testament to the ocean's capacity to conceal both truth and terror. Debris washed ashore sporadically, and sightings from other vessels reported an oppressive silence in the freighter's final coordinates, reinforcing a sense of foreboding mystery. Wooden crates, fragments of the hull, and other objects suggested a sudden, unexplained catastrophe. Meanwhile, radio operators continued to receive echoes of the original SOS, brief and haunting, as if the signal had imprinted itself on the atmosphere. Every detail added to the legend of the ship, though none could clarify the true sequence of events. Mariners and historians alike noted the psychological impact, the way such reports shaped perceptions of maritime risk, and the lingering aura of supernatural possibility surrounding the vanished vessel. Historical documents remain inconsistent, offering only partial insights and contradictory accounts that have fueled speculation for decades about the fate of the crew. Newspaper articles, official reports, and survivor testimonies occasionally conflicted on dates, locations, and details of the final transmission. Scholars have struggled to reconcile these discrepancies, recognizing that much of the story exists in the overlap of rumour, observation, and incomplete records. The freighter's disappearance has therefore remained open-ended, a puzzle with missing pieces, where the combination of recorded signals and silence amplifies the sense of mystery in maritime history. The final transmissions, indecipherable yet unmistakably urgent, lingered in maritime memory, a signal that communicated peril while withholding its full story. Intercepted and catalogued by multiple radio operators, the SOS became emblematic of the unknown dangers that could emerge without warning in open waters. Each fleeting broadcast conveyed urgency, yet provided no clarity on the crew's condition or the source of danger. For those who listened, the calls were simultaneously a plea and a warning, their cryptic nature fostering enduring fascination and fear. Even without definitive answers, the Ourang Medan's last communications marked a permanent imprint on maritime lore. Even today, the Ourang Medan's ghostly SOS is remembered in whispers, vanishing as abruptly as it appeared, leaving nothing but unresolved fear in its wake. The HMAS AE1's Vanish Patrol, 1914. Ocean currents twisted and churned around the waters off New Guinea, where HMAS AE1 began its patrol under the shadow of an approaching storm, the crew unaware that their routine mission would soon become one of history's enduring mysteries. The submarine, one of Australia's first, moved cautiously through narrow channels, its steel hull slicing silently beneath the waves. Naval officers charted the course meticulously, yet even the clearest navigational plans could not account for the treacherous reefs and unseen currents that lurked below. From the deck above, AE1 appeared to be executing a standard patrol, yet every passing hour carried a tension that could not be measured. Within the submarine's steel hull, the hum of machinery and the measured rhythm of the crew's duties filled the confined space. Each officer focused on procedure while the vast, unseen sea pressed against the vessel from every side. The diesel engines, still relatively primitive for 1914, exhaled their exhaust into the narrow compartments, mixing with the salty tang that seeped from the hull. Crew members moved with disciplined precision, checking gauges, adjusting ballast, and maintaining the delicate balance of buoyancy that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Even amid the routine, a subtle awareness lingered that a vessel this isolated faced unknown perils at every turn. Communications with Naval Command were limited and intermittent. Brief radio pulses carrying fragments of reports that hinted at normal operations, yet left lingering uncertainty about conditions below the surface. Signals were sometimes obscured by atmospheric interference, storms, or technical limitations, reducing the clarity of each transmission. Command officers relied on these snapshots to piece together AE1's movements, noting only what the crew chose or was able to report. Among these messages, there was one final transmission, brief and unexplained, that intensified the uncertainty surrounding the patrol. The content was never fully deciphered, leaving an eerie record of a submarine that vanished without explanation. Reefs and jagged shoals lurked beneath deceptively calm waters, while sudden squalls could erupt without warning, reminding anyone who watched from above that the region was as perilous as it was remote. The patrol route passed through channels poorly mapped at the time, where shifting sandbars and coral formations could trap a vessel or force abrupt maneuvers. Sailors on accompanying ships noted the remoteness of the area, where rescue or assistance would be delayed if something went wrong. Even in calm weather, the currents could sweep an inexperienced or unlucky crew off course, highlighting how AE1's patrol demanded constant vigilance and respect for the unpredictable ocean. When AE1 failed to respond to scheduled transmissions, tension rippled through Naval Command, officers aware that a vessel could vanish without leaving so much as a trace in the deep blue expanse. Daily expectations of routine check-ins were replaced by growing anxiety as hours became days. Commanders debated whether the silence was a mechanical failure, a navigational error, or a harbinger of disaster, while families and colleagues braced themselves for an explanation that might never come. The final message, however enigmatic, lingered in reports as a reminder that AE1's fate was already diverging from normalcy, and the patrol's disappearance was becoming a mystery that would endure far beyond the immediate crisis. Search parties combed the waters in small formations, scanning the horizon for signs of wreckage, while historical logs chronicled the earliest hypotheses, none of which could fully account for the submarine's mysterious silence. Ships traversed the channels and reefs, dropping sounding lines and investigating every reported disturbance, yet found nothing conclusive. Crews noted floating debris inconsistent with known maritime traffic, but no trace of AE1 itself emerged. Officers recorded observations in meticulous logs, emphasizing what was visible and what remained absent. Even today, these search reports illustrate the meticulous efforts that yielded a haunting void, underscoring the sense that the submarine had simply vanished from the world. Years turned into decades as theories multiplied: structural failure, environmental hazards, navigational error. But the vessel's last transmission remained a haunting enigma, a fragmentary clue to a story that refused closure. Engineers speculated on early submarine design limitations, and oceanographers considered the influence of currents and undersea topography, yet nothing definitively explained the patrol's end. Every new study and exploration produced partial answers, yet each left the final transmission as the most compelling evidence of something unexplained. In naval history, AE1 became a symbol of the sea's unrelenting unpredictability, where even a single brief communication could hint at a calamity no one would witness firsthand. The disappearance of AE1 seeped into naval lore and popular imagination, inspiring both memorials and investigations, each new exploration probing the depths yet uncovering only partial truths, amplifying the vessel's spectral reputation. Newspapers of the era reported the mystery, while subsequent decades saw commemorations and studies that elevated AE1 to a symbol of lost potential and unresolved questions. The submarine's vanishing became an archetype of early 20th century maritime peril, blending the technical limitations of the period with the enduring fear of the unknown. The final transmission haunted these stories, a ghostly signal whose implications were understood only as silence in the absence of the crew. Modern technology eventually located the submarine's resting place, offering answers to its physical location, but leaving the timing and circumstances of the final transmission shrouded in the same silent mystery that had persisted for generations. Sonar scans and underwater photography revealed the hull intact yet empty, providing closure regarding where AE1 lay. Yet historians and engineers noted that the crew's last report, brief and fragmentary, offered no insight into why the vessel never resurfaced. The discovery provided context, but the human story, the tension, the fear, the unanswered questions, remained unchanged, preserving the aura of AE1 as both a historical artifact and an unresolved enigma. Historians and divers alike reflect on the Vanish patrol not simply as a lost submarine, but as a symbol of the sea's relentless capacity to obscure human endeavour, where a single signal can carry centuries of questions. Each dive or study evokes a sense of awe at both the crew's bravery and the vastness of the environment that swallowed them. Technical analyses can explain design or environmental risks, yet the final transmission continues to resonate as a fragment of consciousness echoing in the deep. Through this lens, AE1's story becomes a meditation on uncertainty, memory, and the enduring power of the unknown, bridging history with the persistent, silent challenge of the ocean. The faint pulse of AE1's last communication still seems to linger in the depths, an unresolved whisper echoing across a century of waves. The Isbjorn and the Arctic Radio Plea, 1932. A pale Arctic dawn stretched over the horizon as the Isbjorn crept through channels of shifting ice, the chill pressing against the hull and silencing all sound except the low hum of the engines. The crew, bundled in thick layers, moved with quiet efficiency, aware that even small mistakes could prove deadly in the unforgiving environment. Observing the ice flows, officers noted subtle shifts that suggested hidden currents beneath the frozen surface. Despite meticulous preparation, the vast emptiness around them carried an unspoken tension, a sense that the Arctic could alter fortunes in moments, leaving men and machinery isolated beyond any hope of immediate assistance. Life aboard the vessel was measured and precise, each sailor following a strict rotation of duties while the cold seeped through the bulkheads and into every corner of the ship. Meals were eaten quickly, logs were kept meticulously, and conversations were subdued, as the monotony of the Arctic patrol was punctuated by sudden gusts of wind and the groan of shifting ice. Officers monitored instruments continuously, watching for variations in temperature and pressure, while the crew maintained the engines and hull. In these routines, they sought reassurance, yet even the familiar rhythm of daily tasks could not erase the ever-present awareness of isolation. Navigating the northern seas demanded constant vigilance, with jagged icebergs lurking beneath the surface and magnetic anomalies twisting compasses in ways that could disorient even the most experienced officers. Charts offered guidance, yet they could not account for every iceberg's drift or the sudden storms that swept across the polar horizon. Every deviation required immediate assessment, with the ship altering course to avoid collision. Lookouts reported changes in ice density, while the captain recalculated headings against shifting wind and current patterns. It was a delicate balance, one in which a single misstep could bring disaster, underscoring the fragility of human control in such an immense and hostile landscape. Radio transmissions were lifelines, but intermittent static and the vast distance to coastal stations meant messages often arrived garbled or faded, heightening the tension of every check-in. Operators listened intently, repeating calls and adjusting frequencies in a ritual that became central to survival. The Isbjorn's radios were state-of-the-art for the time, yet even their reach was limited by atmospheric conditions, polar storms, and magnetic interference. Every transmission was both reassurance and risk, revealing the vessel's position while signalling vulnerability. Crew members grew familiar with the crackling tones, interpreting subtle changes in static as potential harbingers of trouble. The line between safety and danger was measured in the clarity of a single signal. Subtle signs of danger began to appear. Unusual ice drift, strained rivets in the hull, and sudden squalls that forced the crew to react with practiced urgency, though no catastrophe seemed imminent. The officers made careful adjustments, documenting every anomaly, yet the Arctic's patterns were unpredictable. Frost accumulated faster than expected, machinery froze despite diligent maintenance, and the wind carried eerie, whispering sounds over the deck. Though no immediate threat was apparent, the growing tension among the crew reflected an intuitive awareness of the environment's volatility. Every shadow and creaking plank suggested possibilities unseen, a quiet dread that seemed to hang over the ship as persistently as the low-hanging clouds above the ice. Then came the final signal, a brief, urgent radio plea whose content remained cryptic, cutting through the usual static and leaving listeners with a chilling impression that something had gone terribly wrong. Station operators noted the distinct tone, and subsequent attempts to respond were thwarted by interference and fading signals. The crew's words were never recovered, and no further messages were sent. Yet even in its brevity, the transmission carried an undeniable weight, suggesting urgency, fear, and a circumstance beyond immediate remedy. It marked the point at which the Isbjorn crossed the threshold from routine patrol to mysterious disappearance, leaving only speculation to fill the void created by their silence. Attempts to trace the Isbjorn after that transmission were thwarted by the Arctic's unforgiving expanse, with search vessels navigating treacherous ice and enduring storms that slowed progress and obscured visibility. Crews combed known routes, comparing drift patterns and reported ice conditions to project possible locations. Yet no trace of the ship emerged beyond minor debris, and no survivor accounts were recorded. Polar conditions hampered both aerial reconnaissance and maritime patrols, leaving vast areas unexamined. The combination of isolation, extreme climate, and shifting ice created a perfect storm for mystery, as each unsuccessful search deepened the enigma surrounding the vessel's fate. Experts and historians have debated the fate of the ship, examining mechanical limitations, environmental hazards, and documented ice conditions, yet no single explanation fully resolves the mystery. Engineering assessments suggest potential hull failure, while navigational analyses point to sudden ice shifts or miscalculations. Survivor theory is impossible to confirm, and historical accounts of weather patterns leave gaps in understanding. Each hypothesis carries plausibility yet fails to reconcile all known facts. This layered uncertainty has allowed the Isbjorn to occupy a unique place in polar lore, embodying the tension between human endeavour and the Arctic's silent, implacable power. Long after the event, archival records and polar reports continue to evoke the image of the Isbjorn, a vessel that vanished after its brief plea, haunting the imagination of those who study maritime disappearance. Modern researchers pore over maps, radio logs, and testimonies, constructing models of drift and ice dynamics to trace what might have happened. The ship has become a symbol of unresolved fate, with each generation confronting the same unanswered questions. How did the vessel vanish? What compelled the crew to send that final plea? The haunting resonance of these questions ensures that the Isbjorn remains present in the minds of those who follow polar history. The Arctic itself seems to hold its secrets tightly, offering only the echo of human endeavour against a frozen, indifferent world, where the line between routine patrol and disaster is perilously thin. Snow drifts, and icebergs move without warning, concealing truths beneath deceptively calm surfaces. Nature's silence amplifies the absence of human voices, as if the environment itself preserves the final moments of the Isbjorn. Every detail recorded, log entries, radio notes, or debris washed ashore, reminds observers of both the fragility of human enterprise and the unyielding, enigmatic forces of the polar north. Each attempt to piece together the story reinforces the ship's enduring mystery. The Isbjorn's last radio plea drifts eternally through the polar silence, unanswered and unresolved. The RAF Avro Lancastrian Stardust's encoded farewell, 1947. The encoded farewell of the Stardust emerged over distant radio waves like a whisper cut short, its cadence conveying urgency yet concealing intent, a final trace of human presence before the aircraft disappeared. Operators at listening stations recorded the dots and dashes, puzzled by the irregular pattern, and for the first time sensed that the message carried a weight far beyond routine communication. Though the aircraft had departed from Buenos Aires en route to Santiago without incident, the Morse code hinted at a sudden, unexplained anomaly that would confound aviation experts for decades. Crew communications had followed normal patterns for most of the flight, relaying position reports and weather observations, but the final transmission was different. It was irregular, fragmented, and abrupt, drawing immediate concern from ground stations. Experienced operators instinctively recognized its unusual rhythm, yet the content resisted comprehension. The words, or letters, sent across the vast expanse of the Andes left little to interpret except mystery. The Stardust crew, trained and disciplined, had never before deviated from standard radio protocol, making the final encoded message all the more enigmatic and unsettling. Mechanical checks and navigational readings logged earlier in the flight suggested no immediate danger, but hindsight revealed subtle irregularities in fuel calculations and estimated altitudes. Experts reviewing flight records noted inconsistencies that hinted at either misread instruments or unanticipated interference. There were no external reports of collision or emergency maneuvers, yet the abruptness of the message suggested the crew had faced an urgent, unforeseen circumstance. Despite the ordinary details preceding it, the encoded farewell left a distinct impression. The plane had been operating normally, then suddenly, almost imperceptibly, entered a zone of catastrophic uncertainty. The encoded message itself became a source of fascination and frustration. Cryptographers, both professional and amateur, attempted to decode the dots and dashes, yet each hypothesis only deepened the mystery. Some believed it to be a hurried shorthand of critical information. Others speculated it might conceal a final warning about atmospheric conditions or navigational errors. No solution achieved consensus. Even contemporary analyses decades later could only confirm the presence of a deliberate pause and a pattern unlike standard Morse transmissions. The Stardust seemed to have spoken in a language designed to challenge comprehension. Months after the disappearance, fragments of the aircraft were discovered scattered across the Andean slopes, some partially buried beneath snow and ice. The wreckage revealed evidence of a sudden impact, though the final location defied precise triangulation. What remained intangible was the encoded farewell, preserved only in logbooks and memories of radio operators. The message had become a ghostly artifact, a vestige of human intent and urgency without context. It served as a haunting testament to a flight that ended abruptly, leaving the world to speculate about its last moments. Investigations further highlighted contradictions in reported positions and estimated timelines. Flight paths reconstructed from radio logs conflicted with geographical evidence, suggesting that either instruments or calculations had misled the crew. No meteorological explanation fully accounted for the disappearance, and witness reports were non-existent. The sense of enigma was compounded by the reliability of the operator's observations. The radio logs were precise, yet the outcome remained inexplicable. Each new detail only reinforced the perception that the Stardust's final encoded message had occurred in a narrow window of incomprehensible uncertainty. Technical analyses of atmospheric and topographical conditions offered partial insight. Sudden downdrafts, extreme wind shears, and temperature inversions in the Andes could have challenged navigation and stability, yet none of these factors alone explained the abruptness of the transmission. Aviation engineers noted that altimeter readings and compass deviations may have contributed, but the crew's final dots and dashes suggested awareness of impending danger. The encoded signal thus became a riddle woven into the natural complexity of the mountains, a fleeting acknowledgement of forces beyond human control. Reconstruction of the flight trajectory relied on both surviving fragments and the encoded message itself. Experts traced the path to the western slopes of the Andes, yet gaps remained where certainty should have prevailed. Each mile of the flight path was estimated through deduction rather than observation, and every theory carried assumptions that could not be verified. The encoded farewell appeared as a solitary thread linking known points, a final human signature on a journey that had become invisible to conventional mapping. Its persistence in memory and logs elevated the mystery beyond physical wreckage. Cryptographers, aviation historians, and amateur sleuths have continued to study the Stardust's final transmission. Each new theory offers fragments of clarity yet leaves unanswered questions about intent, timing, and meaning. Some suggest the crew attempted to convey coordinates or a critical warning in compressed code. Others see it as a moment of panic, a shorthand born from urgency. Across generations, the encoded farewell has resisted simplification, becoming a touchstone for the unknowable. The message itself survives as both evidence and enigma, a testament to human communication stretched to the limits of comprehension. the legend of the Stardust endures, not merely because of the tragic disappearance, but because of the cryptic farewell that has confounded experts for over 70 years. The aircraft, its crew, and their final coded words remained subjects of fascination, sparking theories from miscalculation to supernatural interference, from meteorological anomaly to human error. Yet every analysis circles back to the same central question. Why did the transmission pause, and what did the crew hope to convey in those final moments? The encoded message has outlived the flight itself, an enduring whisper across time and distance. The Stardust's last encoded message drifts endlessly through the Andes' silent peaks, a human voice preserved in mystery that refuses to be understood. The USS Cyclops wartime signal cutoff 1918. The USS Cyclops, a massive United States Navy cargo ship, left port in early 1918 bound for Baltimore, carrying a cargo of manganese ore that would prove essential to wartime production. Its departure seemed routine, even unremarkable, in a period dominated by naval vigilance and the shadow of the First World War. Yet the vessel's fate would become one of the most perplexing maritime disappearances in American history. Officers aboard maintained normal communications as the ship crossed the Atlantic, sending routine radio updates that carried the familiar cadence of naval procedure. It was during this seemingly ordinary voyage that the Cyclops signals abruptly ceased, leaving the ship, along with its 309 crew members and passengers, vanished without a trace. At the time of its disappearance, the Cyclops was part of a convoy system intended to protect ships from German U-boat attacks, yet it had separated from its escort and proceeded alone into the open ocean. Radio logs indicate that its last known message was routine, reporting course and position, without any hint of trouble or distress. Scholars and naval historians have scrutinized these communications, noting how the absence of a final cry for help deepens the enigma, creating a silence that stretches across the waters where the ship once sailed. The Atlantic in March 1918 offered a cold, capricious environment, but nothing in recorded weather reports suggested storms severe enough to account for the vessel's disappearance. The Cyclops' size alone makes its vanishing particularly confounding. At over 540 feet in length and capable of carrying thousands of tons of cargo, it was the largest ship in the Navy at the time, and its disappearance has been compared to losing a floating city. Ships of similar size could withstand severe storms that might scatter or damage smaller vessels, making the absence of wreckage, debris, or oil slicks all the more perplexing. Naval records describe extensive searches in the Western Atlantic and along the Bermuda Triangle corridor, yet nothing substantial was ever found, fueling speculation that some unseen force, mechanical failure, or perhaps human error had struck with sudden finality. Among the theories surrounding the Cyclops, structural weakness has often been proposed. The ship had undergone rapid conversion from a commercial collier to a naval transport, and some engineers speculated that the manganese or cargo, unusually dense and heavy, may have caused stress on the hull beyond safe limits. Yet no definitive evidence supports this hypothesis, and if it were a simple structural collapse, one would expect debris or remnants to eventually surface. The tension between plausible explanations and the stark absence of physical proof has left the Cyclops' fate a persistent puzzle, one that continues to draw interest from naval experts and maritime historians alike. The human dimension adds another layer of unease. The crew and passengers, numbering over 300, included experienced sailors, officers, and civilian workers who had crossed the Atlantic numerous times. Radio procedures were well established, and the ship was equipped with the era's standard communication technology, including long-wave radio capable of reaching shore stations even in difficult conditions. The sudden cessation of messages suggests an event so swift that no distress signal could follow, or perhaps a signal that was never recorded or intercepted, leaving those monitoring the ship with the chilling realization that the Cyclops had simply vanished from both radar and memory. Contemporary accounts indicate that nearby vessels reported nothing unusual. Some ships recorded clear weather conditions along routes the Cyclops would have followed, while others noted transient fog banks that might obscure visibility. Even taking these natural elements into account, the absence of a single floating object from a ship of its size remains improbable. Investigators in the months following its disappearance explored numerous scenarios, from sabotage to enemy action, but none yielded conclusive proof. The Cyclops' loss became a subject of wartime anxiety and post-war fascination, a case that blurred the line between human error and inexplicable phenomenon. The notion of the Bermuda Triangle as a contributing factor gained traction decades later, though it is debated among scholars whether this designation holds analytical weight or merely amplifies the mystery. Geographically, the Cyclops vanished near the area now associated with this triangle of unusual disappearances, yet contemporary records emphasize the absence of any clear storm or navigational anomaly. While some theorists suggested magnetic anomalies or underwater currents might have contributed to the ship's fate, such ideas remain speculative, lacking supporting data beyond anecdotal inference. The ship's final radio signals remain the only tangible reminder that it existed along that route, transmitting normal updates before disappearing into silence. Efforts to trace the Cyclops' final moments have also examined cargo and weight distribution. Manganese ore used to strengthen steel was known to be extremely dense, and loading practices in 1918 may not have accounted for the shifting stresses during a transatlantic voyage. Naval archives contain reports from officers concerned about potential hull stress, though there is no record of these concerns being acted upon with urgency. The implications of such warnings suggest a subtle tension, a mechanical vulnerability that may have become critical without warning, yet even this scenario cannot fully explain the absence of wreckage, leaving a haunting question mark over the entire expedition. Letters and personal accounts from families awaiting news underscore the human cost of the Cyclops' disappearance. Unlike modern maritime disasters, where survivors can provide first-hand accounts, this loss did not testify. There is no first-hand narrative to illuminate the events leading to the vanishing. Investigators had only the radio logs and known maritime conditions to work with, yet these sparse threads do not create a complete tapestry. The quietness left behind, a ship and hundreds of souls suddenly erased from communication and observation, amplifies the sense of mystery, transforming a logistical wartime loss into a story that carries the weight of the unknown. Decades later, the Cyclops remains a symbol of unexplained maritime disappearance. Its story is often revisited in naval histories, documentaries, and maritime investigations, with each retelling emphasizing the eeriness of a ship transmitting normal updates one moment and never being heard from again. Modern technology, including deep-sea scanning and oceanographic analysis, has failed to reveal definitive answers, leaving only educated conjecture and continued fascination. The Cyclops voyage, routine on the surface, now occupies a liminal space between documented history and the enduring unknown. Ultimately, the USS Cyclops' last radio message endures as both a technical record and a haunting reminder. Its existence proves the ship's presence in the Atlantic, yet the abrupt termination of signals speaks to an event that defies full comprehension. Scholars, enthusiasts, and naval historians continue to sift through data and archives, seeking patterns, probabilities, or overlooked clues, but the silence surrounding the Cyclops persists, expanding with each passing year as a testament to the mysteries that oceans can conceal. The Cyclops vanished from the Atlantic, its final signal swallowed by the sea. The SS Baychimo's Arctic Drift, 1931. Thick sheets of Arctic ice pressed against the Baychimo's hull, holding the vessel hostage while the wind carried whispers of its last radio message. The freighter, designed for harsh northern routes, had been a reliable transport for the Hudson's Bay Company, carrying furs, supplies, and goods between settlements along the frozen coast. Its crew monitored ice flows and shifting weather patterns with careful attention, sending routine radio updates that described ice thickness and drift. Yet despite these precautions, the Baychimo became trapped in an unforgiving expanse of pack ice near Alaska's northern shores, and those transmissions would prove to be the last human words associated with the ship for decades to come. In the winter of 1931, the Hudson's Bay Company dispatched the sturdy freighter on a routine supply run, unaware that nature itself would become its captor. The vessel was fully loaded with cargo, including merchandise bound for remote trading posts, and its crew was experienced in navigating frigid waters. Arctic conditions, however, offered an unpredictability that charts could not fully convey. Temperatures dropped to deadly lows, fogs rose from the sea like spectral curtains, and the ice, though seemingly solid, shifted with currents and tides in ways that made any calculation of safe passage tenuous at best. A terse radio transmission noted only position and ice conditions, the final words recorded before human voices fell silent across the frozen expanse. Operators in nearby stations received updates describing encroaching flows and the precarious angle of the hull, yet nothing indicated imminent catastrophe. The messages, ordinary in tone, carried the subtle tension of men aware of the Arctic's mercurial power. They spoke of wind direction, temperature, and drift with precision, yet beyond those details lay an unspoken acknowledgement. The Baychimo was caught, and its liberation would depend on forces beyond human control. Crew members trudged across cracking ice toward rescue boats, leaving the Baychimo to drift under the indifferent Arctic sky. The decision to abandon ship was deliberate, carried out with orderly precision, and no lives were lost in the evacuation. Men watched their sturdy vessel recede into the white horizon, a massive silhouette frozen in ice but not yet defeated by nature. The ice, unyielding and yet mobile, carried the ship in a slow and inexorable motion, leaving the crew with only the memory of its solidity and the haunting echo of the final radio signals as they were ferried to safety. Months later, trappers reported a ghostly silhouette on the horizon, the ship unmanned yet stubbornly navigating the shifting ice flows. Sightings came sporadically, each account recorded with the detail of those accustomed to reading the Arctic landscape for subtle signs. Hunters, traders, and explorers all noted the same phenomena. The Baychimo moved without human guidance, appearing suddenly in channels or near settlement points before vanishing again. These intermittent appearances transformed the freighter from an abandoned vessel into something spectral, a silent observer of a land that few dared to traverse. Years passed, and the Baychimo resurfaced intermittently, stubbornly defying decay, as if the Arctic itself had lent it unnatural endurance. Winter after winter, explorers noted her prow sticking above frozen waters or drifting along channels, cargo intact and masts still upright. The harsh conditions that usually claimed wooden and steel ships over months had only slowed her decay. This persistence fascinated and unsettled those who chronicled her journey, as the notion of a ship abandoned yet surviving the extremes of polar ice seemed almost impossible, a paradox suspended between the natural and the uncanny. Salvage crews battled blizzards and shifting ice, only to abandon their efforts when the ship remained immovable, drifting beyond reach once more. Expeditions attempted to tow her to safe harbours, while others hoped to reclaim her cargo, but every attempt met the same frustrating obstacle: ice that gripped with relentless force and currents that pulled unpredictably. These failed efforts reinforced the impression of the Baychimo as a vessel that belonged less to human command than to the frozen Arctic itself, obeying neither orders nor reason and refusing to surrender to any earthly authority. Currents and winds carried the Baychimo in patterns that seemed at once predictable and inexplicably erratic, challenging every calculation of Arctic navigation. Observers noted that the ship sometimes appeared to retrace familiar channels, only to be swept suddenly into uncharted passages. Weather charts and ice maps could explain part of her movement, yet there remained a sense that the vessel existed under its own peculiar logic, a drifting presence shaped as much by mystery as by natural forces. Each sighting became a puzzle for those who followed the northern seas, a reminder that the Arctic still held dominion over human intentions. Newspapers and explorers recounted sightings with awe, turning the abandoned freighter into a spectral emblem of the North's merciless solitude. Writers described her as a phantom ship, though records remained factual, noting only verified locations and cargo conditions. Photographs captured her frozen deck and upright masts, while oral accounts preserved the chilling impression left on those who glimpsed her. Over time, the Baychimo came to represent the uncanny persistence of human creation when confronted by the vast, indifferent Arctic, a vessel neither fully alive nor entirely claimed by the ice. Eventually, the ship slipped beyond recorded memory, leaving nothing but reports and speculation of its final wandering across the ice. The last verified sighting occurred decades after abandonment, when Arctic hunters noted her silhouette briefly illuminated by the low sun of a frigid winter day. After that, she was gone, either crushed by ice, sunk into hidden waters, or carried further into obscurity by the shifting pack. Historians and explorers alike can piece together her story only through these fragments of observation and record, leaving the Baychimo's ultimate fate a mystery locked within the Arctic itself. Then, Without warning or witness, the Baychimo vanished into the frozen horizon, leaving only silence behind. The Flying Tiger Line Flight 739's Mid-Pacific transmission 1962. The hum of engines carried steadily over the Pacific, a routine signal that would become the aircraft's final recorded voice. Flight 739, a Douglas C-124 Globemaster II, had lifted off from Travis Air Force Base with more than 90 US. Military personnel aboard bound for Southeast Asia. The sky above the open ocean was calm, its vastness stretching unbroken in every direction, and at that altitude, the aircraft maintained steady communication with ground stations. The transmissions were ordinary, position updates, altitude readings, and brief confirmations of course, but unknowingly they marked the last time anyone would hear from the flight as it moved across the mid-Pacific expanse. Travis Air Force Base had dispatched the C-124 Globemaster II on a mission that seemed routine, transporting troops and equipment to support operations in Vietnam. Its cargo included essential supplies, and its flight plan was charted with military precision. Crew members were experienced, familiar with both the aircraft and the transoceanic route, and the mission was expected to be uneventful. Still, the Pacific remained an environment defined by isolation, a place where even a seasoned crew could encounter conditions beyond prediction or control. A concise radio update indicated position and altitude, ordinary in every detail yet destined to be the last human words from the flight. Controllers recorded the transmission at 13:33 hours local time, noting that all systems appeared normal and that Flight 739 was on schedule. Beyond the factual report, however, there was a quiet tension inherent in routine. The ocean beneath was immense, unrelenting, and capable of swallowing both machine and message in a matter of moments. No subsequent communications were received, and the aircraft soon disappeared from all radar tracking. Controllers watched screens with growing concern as radar blips vanished, and a vast swath of Pacific water offered no clue to the plane's whereabouts. Nearby flights were alerted to search and monitor, but the enormity of the ocean rendered even a coordinated effort daunting. Every second that passed without contact increased the uncertainty, transforming routine monitoring into an urgent, silent plea for information. Despite experience and technology, the disappearance introduced a void that seemed almost tangible, stretching across thousands of square miles of open water. High-altitude winds and isolated storm cells churned the surface below, transforming the ocean into an uncharted grid where evidence could easily be lost. The Pacific, vast and unyielding, could conceal wreckage, instruments, and even entire aircraft with a patience that outlasted human efforts. Waves and currents had the capacity to scatter debris beyond recognition, and storms could distort any surface search with whitecaps that masked floating wreckage. In these conditions, the absence of evidence became a presence in itself, amplifying the mystery and emphasizing the helplessness of those on the ground. Military and aviation specialists reviewed flight records meticulously, searching for explanations in maintenance logs, navigation charts, and the fleeting final transmissions. Every hypothesis, from mechanical failure to navigational error, was considered against the unyielding reality that no physical trace of the aircraft was ever found. Investigators noted the plane's systems had been inspected before departure, and there were no reports of unusual mechanical issues. Still, the question of what could extinguish an aircraft mid-flight, leaving behind only silence, remained unresolved, compelling experts to confront the limitations of even the most detailed technical scrutiny. At homes and bases alike, relatives and comrades waited in silent tension, acutely aware that no new signals meant the unknown had already begun to claim the flight. Families clung to hope even as the hours stretched into days, and officers coordinated search efforts across the Pacific. The emotional weight of the disappearance contrasted sharply with the precise, impersonal language of radio communication logs, creating a duality between human concern and technological record that underscored the mystery. Every unanswered attempt to contact Flight 739 deepened a sense of disquiet that would persist for years. Planes and ships combed section after section of the Pacific, often flying or sailing through featureless expanses that swallowed their efforts as effortlessly as they might a message in the wind. Grid searches were conducted over thousands of square miles, yet despite careful planning and extensive resources, nothing was recovered. The vastness of the ocean and the limitations of mid-20th century radar and sonar technology rendered the search an exercise in both determination and futility. Each day that passed without discovery reinforced the flight's disappearance as a puzzle beyond the reach of immediate resolution. Flight 739 came to represent the fragile boundary between human certainty and the vast, unknowable reach of the world's largest ocean. Scholars and aviation enthusiasts alike studied the disappearance, examining official reports and first-hand accounts of the mission. Media coverage at the time emphasized the unprecedented nature of the vanishing and the stark reality that no communication after the final transmission could provide clarity. The aircraft's absence became emblematic of the unpredictable nature of the Pacific, a reminder that even advanced technology could fail to conquer its immensity. Every investigation concluded with the same stark reality. The aircraft had vanished, leaving only the final transmissions to mark its passage across empty skies. Despite the thoroughness of the military search and the expertise of investigators, no evidence surfaced to indicate what befell Flight 739. The final radio messages, routine and unremarkable in content, now carry a weight far beyond their original purpose, serving as the only confirmation that the aircraft had traversed the Pacific before disappearing entirely from human observation. Beyond the reach of radar and human sight, Flight 739 slipped into silence, its fate never revealed. The N209 Submarine Dakar's last signal, 1968. The submarine cut through shadowed waters, its routine signals hinting at life aboard even as it slipped into an unseen depth of the Mediterranean. The N209, a recently commissioned vessel of the Israeli Navy, had embarked on its maiden voyage with a full complement of trained crew, each responsible for the intricate operations required to navigate beneath the surface. At the time, the Mediterranean appeared calm, yet beneath its placid exterior the sea held pressure and currents that could challenge even the most experienced submariners. Its radio transmissions were methodical, repeating expected coordinates and status reports, signals that carried across the water and yet would become the final human confirmation of its presence. Built for Israel's fledgling naval force, the N209 represented both technological ambition and operational necessity. The crew included seasoned sailors alongside those newly assigned to undersea duty, all aware of the delicate balance between machinery and environment that their mission demanded. The submarine systems were inspected and approved before departure, and the vessel carried sufficient supplies for the journey. Still, every maiden voyage carries an element of unpredictability. While the sea's surface betrayed no hint of danger, the deep holds currents, terrain, and unseen obstacles that can transform routine operations into perilous tests of endurance and skill. A final radio check confirmed coordinates and operational status, ordinary words that would mark the last known human contact from the vessel. The message, transmitted to naval authorities on shore, was brief and precise, reflecting standard protocol. There was no indication of distress or equipment malfunction. Moments after the message was logged, the submarine failed to respond to subsequent communications. The abrupt silence contrasted sharply with the prior reliability of transmissions. It was as if the vessel had simply vanished, leaving the crew's fate uncertain and the Mediterranean expanse between its last known position and the open sea a vast canvas of speculation. Command centers mobilized instantly, dispatching ships and coordinating sonar sweeps across a widening corridor in hopes of intercepting any signal or trace. Naval officers implemented contingency plans, directing multiple vessels to scan known submarine routes and potential underwater hazards. Communication with other maritime assets intensified, and crews on search ships worked around the clock, meticulously covering each sector. Every attempt to detect the Dakar returned no data. Each unanswered ping from sonar and radio increased the tension for those coordinating the search. The Mediterranean, seemingly benign from above, revealed itself as a space where human observation and technology had profound limitations. Currents shifted unpredictably, underwater ridges rose like hidden cliffs, and pressure zones pressed against the hull, each factor amplifying the unknown dangers that the crew could not anticipate. Engineers recognized that even small miscalculations in depth or orientation could jeopardize the vessel's integrity. The submarine's design was robust, but the Mediterranean contains pockets of turbulence and abrupt seabed variations capable of challenging even the most advanced machinery of the era. Investigators later noted that these environmental elements, combined with the impossibility of visual observation at depth, could conceal both wreckage and signals, leaving the vessel's final position a haunting unknown. Naval engineers and investigators pored over maintenance logs and operational procedures, weighing every mechanical and navigational possibility, yet no conclusion emerged from the silence. Every system had passed inspection before departure, and prior exercises had shown the crew capable of responding to emergencies. Investigators considered a range of scenarios, from minor mechanical failure escalating to catastrophic loss, to navigational errors compounded by unseen underwater obstacles. Yet the lack of wreckage and the disappearance of all communications created a wall of uncertainty. Each theory was plausible, yet unverifiable, leaving only the unanswered question of what had become of the N209. Within the steel confines, the crew rotated through watches and checks, their disciplined routines now serving as the only testament to life aboard before contact was lost. Daily operations involved careful monitoring of depth, speed and engine function, while communication protocols ensured that the vessel's position was constantly reported. The meticulous routines that sustained life in such a confined space contrasted sharply with the uncertainty that now enveloped the submarine after its final transmission. The absence of response to subsequent messages transformed the crew's ordinary existence into a symbol of vanishing, a human presence abruptly erased by an environment that offered no warning. Sonar pulses cut through the water, scanning vast sections of the seabed, but each sweep returned emptiness, amplifying the enigma of the submarine's fate. Ships and aircraft combed mapped sectors and blind spots, yet the search yielded nothing tangible. Underwater cliffs, steep drop-offs, and shifting sediment rendered sonar detection difficult, and every unconfirmed reading left investigators with more questions than answers. The combination of technological limitation and natural complexity was as much an exercise in patience as in precision. Even the most thorough and repeated sweeps could not guarantee discovery, leaving the submarine suspended in both space and memory. The disappearance of the Dakar entered naval lore as a stark illustration of how even a well-equipped vessel can vanish in silence, leaving unanswered questions in its wake. Reports, memorials and studies documented the loss, preserving the factual details without offering resolution. The vessel's absence became emblematic of the Mediterranean's unpredictable depths, a reminder that skill, technology and preparation can still be humbled by the hidden forces of nature. Historians and naval enthusiasts continue to examine the case, retracing the vessel's intended route and considering the final radio transmissions as the last human trace in a story defined by mystery. Every investigation concluded with the same reality. The final transmission was the only sign that the N209 had ever been in those waters. Extensive searches, sonar sweeps and archival reviews provided no additional evidence. What remained was the documentation of the crew's disciplined procedures, the submarine's specifications, and the last words transmitted through the radio system. A snapshot of human presence before it was claimed by silence. Even decades later, the Mediterranean holds the submarine's fate as a secret, preserving the enigma for both investigators and observers alike. A reminder of the ocean's power to erase and conceal. Signals ceased abruptly, and the vessel was gone from both sight and radar, leaving only unanswered echoes in its place. The Air France Flight 447's Automated Messages 2009. The Airbus. A 330 climbed steadily over the Atlantic, its instruments reporting normal flight parameters even as invisible turbulence churned miles below. Passengers slept in dimly lit cabins, unaware of the subtle disturbances far above the stormy clouds. Crew members followed standard rotations, monitoring altitude, fuel and weather reports, as they had on countless transatlantic flights before. At this moment, the aircraft appeared a model of precision, each system functioning according to design, each sensor faithfully recording speed, altitude, and orientation. Yet the Atlantic's vastness carried a hidden volatility, and even the most advanced instruments could not anticipate every quirk of the atmosphere that might challenge the crew. Pilots and crew followed standard procedures on a routine overnight journey from Rio de Janeiro to Paris, their experience and training guiding every decision. The flight had departed on time, with a full complement of passengers and cargo, and the cockpit crew consisted of seasoned pilots familiar with high-altitude Atlantic crossings. Their familiarity with Airbus protocols and emergency procedures lent a professional calm to the environment, yet the journey's isolation over open ocean meant that even minor anomalies could escalate without immediate external support. Every adjustment to autopilot, every readout from flight instruments, was a small thread in a delicate balance between human control and mechanical reliance. Storm clouds gathered far below, forming turbulent corridors of wind and moisture that challenged both navigation and instrumentation at cruising altitude. Meteorological reports had indicated convective activity along the planned route, and while the pilots could navigate safely around some regions, pockets of turbulence and wind shear persisted. The aircraft's radar scanned ahead, but certain atmospheric conditions could produce rapid, localized variations in airspeed and pressure that were difficult to predict. In the controlled environment of the cockpit, the storm below was both tangible and abstract, present in data and in subtle vibrations transmitted through the fuselage, a reminder that the open Atlantic held forces beyond human reach. A series of automated alerts began transmitting to ground control, each message succinctly noting deviations in airspeed and sensor readings without human interpretation. These messages were part of the aircraft's real-time monitoring system, designed to report irregularities directly to maintenance and flight operations centers. Each alert was precise, technical, and devoid of emotion, yet its repetition signaled the emergence of a problem that even skilled pilots could not immediately rectify. For controllers on the ground, the messages were warnings of unfolding events, an electronic breadcrumb trail hinting at growing instability over a section of ocean thousands of miles from land. The cockpit became a place of tense calculation as pilots cross-checked readings and attempted corrective maneuvers, while the automated system continued issuing updates. Airspeed discrepancies appeared and disappeared, leaving uncertainty about the reliability of the instruments. Pilots followed standard emergency procedures, adjusting pitch and altitude, disengaging the autopilot, and monitoring the aircraft's response. Each decision was guided by data, experience, and intuition, yet the combination of inconsistent readings and atmospheric turbulence created a scenario where every adjustment could have unforeseen consequences. The quiet hum of the instruments was punctuated by intermittent alarms, each one a reminder that the aircraft's systems and human operators were now in a delicate interplay. Autopilot disengagement and conflicting instrument data created a cascade of mechanical and operational anomalies, turning routine flight management into a critical challenge. The aircraft began responding differently than expected, and cockpit recordings show rapid fluctuations in altitude and speed. Pilots attempted to stabilize the plane, while automated systems continued sending intermittent alerts. The juxtaposition of human action and machine feedback highlighted both the sophistication and the vulnerability of modern flight, where even routine flights can transform into a scenario in which uncertainty grows with each passing minute. The Atlantic below remained a vast, unyielding expanse, indifferent to the complexity unfolding above it. For a final span of minutes, automated messages streamed intermittently, marking the last electronic evidence of the aircraft's presence before silence claimed the connection entirely. Each transmission documented sensor readings, altitude, and airspeed, forming a trail that would later become central to understanding the flight's final moments. Ground control monitored these messages with increasing concern, noting the sequence and timing of the automated alerts. The sudden cessation of communication left investigators with only these fragments of data to reconstruct events. Human observation had been replaced by technological monitoring, yet the story remained incomplete, suspended in the intersection of information and absence. Rescue teams combed a vast expanse of the Atlantic, grappling with unpredictable currents, scattered debris, and the immense scale of the open ocean. Ships and aircraft scanned sectors informed by the last known coordinates and automated transmissions, yet the vastness of the sea complicated recovery efforts. Initial searches focused on floating wreckage, but strong currents dispersed potential debris fields, and storm activity obscured the aircraft's descent path. Even with satellite tracking and maritime coordination, locating evidence in such an environment proved a formidable challenge. Each day of search intensified the uncertainty, illustrating the contrast between human effort and the ocean's inexorable immensity. Black box retrieval and analysis revealed a sequence of sensor malfunctions, human responses and environmental factors, though the precise moment of catastrophe remained partially obscured. Investigators pieced together the timeline from cockpit voice recordings, flight data, and automated messages, noting both the aircraft's technical responses and the crew's attempts to correct deviations. While much was learned about the progression of events, certain variables, turbulence intensity, rapid instrument inconsistencies, and microclimatic conditions, could not be fully quantified. The data illuminated parts of the flight, yet left the final trajectory and exact circumstances of impact shrouded in uncertainty. The automated signals, now historical records, stand as the only markers of Flight 447's final path, a technological breadcrumb trail into the unknown. The transmissions documented airspeed, altitude, and system alerts in precise numerical terms, offering investigators insight without providing full narrative clarity. They became both evidence and symbol, a reminder that even with advanced monitoring, some aspects of aviation's interaction with nature remain beyond human reconstruction. The Atlantic kept its secrets. The final minutes of the aircraft's journey were captured only in data points that hinted at unfolding chaos with no accompanying resolution. Above a restless sea, Flight 447 vanished, leaving only fragmented data to hint at the events that unfolded beyond human sight. The USS Grunion's Aleutian Signal, 1942. Mist and shadow clung to the Aleutian horizon as the Grunion transmitted its last routine report, an ordinary signal that would soon become a final echo across the Pacific. The morning light struggled to penetrate low-hanging clouds, and the waters churned with the cold rhythm of the North Pacific, reflecting a grey expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly. For Naval Command, the message was routine: coordinates confirmed, patrol status nominal, no unusual events reported. Yet beneath the calm facade, the combination of isolation, unpredictable currents, and wartime pressure created a quiet tension that was invisible to those receiving the signal far away. Even ordinary transmissions carried the weight of uncertainty when sent from such a remote theatre of operations. Inside the control rooms, sailors moved with practiced precision, hands steady on dials and gauges as every watch rotation became a careful dance against isolation and fatigue. Each crew member knew the subtleties of the submarine's mechanisms, the subtle shifts of ballast, the hum of the diesel engines, the vibrations transmitted through the hull. Orders were executed with military exactitude, yet the pressure of operating in a region known for enemy patrols and harsh environmental conditions lent every action an undertone of urgency. The officers' eyes constantly scanned instruments, mentally calculating the margin for error in a patrol where mistakes could be fatal. Bitter winds howled across jagged islands, and unseen currents twisted beneath the surface, shaping an unpredictable landscape where every maneuver carried hidden risk. The Aleutian archipelago is notorious for sudden storms, fog, and icy waves, creating a natural labyrinth where visibility and maneuverability are constantly compromised. Submerged ridges and shifting thermoclines complicated navigation, and the crew had to account for variables invisible to the naked eye, relying entirely on sonar readings and nautical charts. Each decision was informed by both technical knowledge and intuition, honed from months of training, yet even the most experienced sailors could not fully anticipate the ocean's capricious behaviour. The radio's hum carried updates of position and operational status, each transmission meticulously logged, unaware it would mark the crew's final communication. The messages were brief and precise, listing coordinates, patrol progress, and mechanical status. There was no sense of forewarning in their cadence, no indication that these words would become the last human signals to cross the Aleutian waters. To those monitoring the transmissions on shore, the signals were routine, part of the rhythm of wartime communication, yet with hindsight, they became haunting markers of a sudden and inexplicable silence. Orders from command guided the patrol's course, demanding vigilance as the crew navigated areas known for enemy activity and treacherous underwater formations. The Grunion followed strict directives, scanning for enemy vessels while avoiding detection. Its sonar ears attuned to every faint vibration in the water. Maneuvers were calculated to reduce the acoustic signature, requiring the crew to act in synchrony under conditions that were unforgiving and often unpredictable. Each decision carried consequences not only for the submarine's mission, but for the lives of every sailor aboard, reinforcing the tension that threaded through the patrol's daily operations. After a brief interval, all signals stopped, and the silence that followed was immediate and absolute, leaving Naval Command grasping at the sudden void. Attempts to re-establish contact met only static, as if the submarine had been erased from the radar and radio spectrum at the very instant it last reported. The abruptness of the loss created a profound unease, a stark contrast to the ordinary reports that had preceded it. For officers monitoring the patrol from distant stations, the lack of response was more than a procedural concern. It was the first sign that something had gone irretrievably wrong in one of the most isolated and dangerous theatres of the war. Fog-shrouded reconnaissance planes and ice-battered ships combed every sector, their crews straining to detect a trace where the ocean's surface gave nothing away. Patrols followed the last known coordinates, carefully mapping probable drift zones based on currents and prevailing winds, yet the combination of fog, rough seas, and submerged topography thwarted every search effort. Days passed with no sighting of debris or indication of the Grunion's fate, emphasizing the vastness and indifference of the environment. Each sweep returned only the emptiness of the North Pacific, a reminder of the ocean's ability to conceal even substantial human-made objects from the eyes of the world. Examinations of logs, construction schematics, and patrol directives offered potential explanations: mechanical failure, environmental hazards, or wartime engagement, but no conclusion could be confirmed. Naval engineers analysed every aspect of the Grunion's design, from propulsion to hull integrity, while historians reviewed mission records for indications of enemy activity. All hypotheses remained speculative to some degree, grounded in fact but incomplete, leaving the disappearance unresolved. Even decades later, researchers acknowledged that the combination of technical, environmental, and operational variables might forever obscure the true sequence of events. Historians and naval officers reflected on the patrol's abrupt end, recognizing how the Grunion's disappearance highlighted the perilous intersection of human strategy and nature's indifference. Memorials and records preserved the names and service of every crew member, ensuring that history remembered those lost in an operation that ended with a whisper of radio signals and no further trace. The patrol became emblematic of the hidden dangers faced by submarines in remote theatres, where operational mastery could still be undone by the ocean's vast, unpredictable power. The loss resonated not only in historical records, but also in the collective consciousness of naval service, a reminder of how easily human endeavours can vanish. All that remained of the submarine's final hours was a single recorded transmission, preserved as the only thread connecting the crew to the outside world. It is a quiet, persistent signal that speaks not of heroics or catastrophe, but of presence and absence, a technical document transformed into a haunting trace. Decades of research, dives, and technological analysis have yet to uncover a complete picture, leaving the final moment suspended between fact and enigma. That last radio message endures as a bridge across time, a solitary reminder that vast oceans hold secrets beyond the reach of even the most diligent search. Beyond the Aleutian fog, the Grunion vanished entirely, leaving only a fleeting signal to mark the boundary between human effort and the ocean's enduring enigma. The C-54 Skymaster over Alaska, 1950. Frozen clouds stretched across the Alaskan horizon as the C-54 Skymaster sent its final routine signal, a communication that would soon become the last human echo in the sky. The early morning light struggled against a persistent layer of grey, revealing only jagged peaks and snow-covered valleys below, a landscape so vast it seemed to swallow everything in its reach. For air traffic controllers monitoring the flight, the transmission was ordinary, confirming altitude, heading, and routine operational status. Yet, in hindsight, those concise words became the last tangible link between the crew and the outside world, a fleeting signal suspended over a wilderness that would not easily relinquish its secrets. Within the cockpit, pilots monitored altimeters and compasses, their hands steady despite the chill seeping through the fuselage and the relentless stretch of wilderness below. Flight engineers checked dials and gauges with practiced attention, aware that any mechanical issue in these remote skies could escalate into catastrophe before help could arrive. The crew's cohesion and training were evident in every precise adjustment, every careful reading, yet even the most experienced aviators faced the challenge of balancing protocol with intuition amid the unpredictable conditions of Alaska's high-altitude corridors. Rugged peaks rose like silent sentinels, their slopes hidden beneath layers of snow and ice, creating a maze where navigation demanded both skill and constant vigilance. Valleys plunged sharply between mountains, and glaciers carved lines of ice that gleamed dimly in the muted light. Sudden snow squalls could appear without warning, reducing visibility to mere meters and turning the familiar into an indistinguishable expanse of white. The landscape itself was as much an obstacle as the skies above, each ridge and cliff a potential hazard invisible until the last moment. The radio transmitted brief updates, confirming headings and altitude, each word now preserved as the last human trace of the aircraft's presence over that unforgiving land. Controllers on the ground noted the routine cadence, unaware that no further transmissions would follow. The hum of the aircraft's communication systems carried normalcy, a mechanical reassurance that belied the growing danger of a flight operating in extreme isolation. Every verified message would later become a haunting reference point in an investigation that could never fully explain what happened next. Wind gusts and shifting air currents buffeted the plane as the crew adjusted instruments and headings, aware that a sudden whiteout could erase every familiar landmark in an instant. Pilots calculated headings and corrected altitudes in response to turbulence, balancing the craft's speed with the need for caution over peaks that rose without warning. Each minute passed with tense focus, a careful dance between man and machine over a frozen wilderness that offered no room for error. Even routine flight operations became an exercise in heightened awareness, where survival depended on both skill and circumstance. Readings began to fluctuate subtly, and within moments all signals vanished, leaving controllers with nothing but static and an empty flight corridor stretching into the unknown. Attempts to re-establish communication met only the hiss of silence, a stark contrast to the normal transmissions that had continued just moments before. The sudden absence of signals was immediate and absolute, creating a vacuum of uncertainty over a landscape so vast that any trace of the aircraft could be obscured almost instantly. The crew's final movements remained known only through that brief, vanishing transmission, a signal frozen in time. Teams combed the terrain from the air and on the ground, scanning frozen valleys and jagged ridges, yet each pass revealed only a silent wilderness that refused to yield any trace of the missing aircraft. Search planes flew low along narrow corridors, while ground parties navigated treacherous passes, snow and ice, leaving no stone unturned in a desperate effort to locate the Skymaster. Harsh weather, limited visibility, and rugged topography made the search almost impossible, emphasizing the vast isolation in which the crew had disappeared. Days of coordinated efforts brought only frustration and mounting concern, as the wilderness seemed to reclaim the aircraft entirely. Investigators scrutinized mechanical logs, flight procedures, and weather reports, weighing possibilities such as turbulence, equipment failure, and navigational error, though none could fully explain the disappearance. Every maintenance record and pre-flight inspection was examined in detail, while meteorological data painted a picture of unpredictable gusts and localized snowstorms. Despite exhaustive analysis, no single cause could account for the abrupt loss, leaving the final radio transmission as the sole tangible clue. Speculation remained grounded in documented hazards, yet the full sequence of events remained concealed within Alaska's icy expanse. The incident entered aviation history as a cautionary tale, shaping Alaskan air safety and serving as a reminder of how remote conditions could erase even the most well-prepared flights. Protocols for navigation, emergency communication, and flight planning over mountainous terrain were revised, reflecting the lessons learned from the Skymaster's disappearance. For pilots, engineers, and historians alike, the event emphasized the fragile balance between human planning and nature's unyielding forces, a sobering acknowledgement that even routine flights could vanish without warning in extreme environments. The final transmission endures as the only remaining proof of the Skymaster's last moments, a fleeting voice suspended over one of Earth's harshest and most unforgiving landscapes. It captures not only coordinates and status, but also a reminder of human vulnerability in the face of wilderness that cannot be tamed. Every record of the flight, every map of the route, ultimately points back to that single radio signal, frozen in time, as the only bridge connecting the crew's presence to those waiting far below in Alaska's valleys and settlements. High above the icy peaks, the Skymaster disappeared completely, leaving only that faint final signal to hint at the limits of human reach against nature's relentless expanse. The Malaysian Airlines flight MH 370's final words 2014. As flight MH 370 climbed into the skies above Malaysia, its routine transmissions masked the ominous silence that would follow, with the final words echoing briefly across air traffic channels. Departing Kuala Lumpur International Airport under clear weather conditions, the Boeing 777-200ER followed its scheduled route toward Beijing, a flight that began like any other, yet would soon enter the annals of modern aviation as one of the most confounding disappearances in history. For the controllers monitoring the departure, the aircraft's progress seemed standard, a familiar cadence of altitude checks and course confirmations. But those signals would ultimately become the last verifiable contact with the plane. The vast expanse of the southern skies above the Malay Peninsula offered no hint of the mystery about to unfold. Inside the cockpit, seasoned pilots and flight attendants carried out standard procedures, unaware that every pre-flight check and routine adjustment would soon become part of a vanished narrative. The crew relied on extensive experience and well-drilled protocols, coordinating with air traffic control, monitoring instrument panels, and verifying weather data over the route. Each hand movement and adjustment reflected hours of preparation and professionalism, yet even the most meticulous planning could not foresee the conditions that would soon place the aircraft beyond human tracking. The cabin hummed with activity, passengers engaged in ordinary routines, entirely unaware that the flight would become a global enigma. Radar blips marked the aircraft's steady course over the Malay Peninsula, each reading a faint reassurance that normalcy prevailed, yet none could predict the trajectory of what would soon become a global mystery. Ground-based radar systems tracked the flight across populated areas before it entered less monitored airspace over the South China Sea, a corridor that stretched toward open ocean. Every blip recorded by Malaysian and international systems represented real-time human observation, yet the limitations of radar coverage created invisible gaps that would later complicate efforts to reconstruct the final hours. In retrospect, the early tracking data became both a guide and a haunting reminder of what would soon vanish. "Good night, Malaysian 370, the captain's calm voice resonated across the communication system, brief and unremarkable, yet destined to endure as the last human sound from the aircraft. That phrase, simple and routine, now represents the only confirmed verbal transmission before the flight disappeared from conventional radar. Air traffic controllers recorded it as an ordinary farewell, but in hindsight, it became the haunting signature of the aircraft's final connection to the world, a fleeting human imprint suspended over an ocean that would obscure the fate of 239 lives. Hours later, automated satellite pings traced a path across the southern Indian Ocean, their steady pulses hinting at position and altitude, a cryptic digital footprint that would guide investigators without offering certainty. These communications, known as Inmarsat handshakes, provided intermittent signals long after conventional tracking failed, each ping a binary pulse representing life and motion, yet concealing every detail of the aircraft's circumstances. Analysts used these data points to extrapolate probable flight paths, creating arcs across thousands of miles of remote ocean. Even in their precision, the signals offered only fragments of truth, leaving gaps that no radar, no observation, and no record could fill. Shortly after the final voice transmission, radar contact ceased, transponders fell silent, and the aircraft vanished into a stretch of ocean that seemed to expand with every unanswered query. No distress signal was issued, no emergency communication was detected, and for hours authorities could only speculate based on incomplete data. The sudden disappearance transformed routine monitoring into an urgent concern, as aviation officials, meteorologists, and analysts from multiple countries confronted the limits of technology and the vastness of the southern Indian Ocean. Each unanswered question deepened the sense of mystery surrounding a flight that had been perfectly ordinary mere hours before. Ships, planes, and sonar arrays combed thousands of square miles, each sweep returning fragments of hope and frustration, as teams from multiple nations struggled against currents, waves, and the vast unyielding sea. From Australia to Malaysia to France and beyond, search efforts involved some of the most advanced maritime and aerial technology available, yet the search area remained vast and shifting. Oceanographic conditions, strong currents, and deep-sea trenches thwarted attempts to locate debris quickly, turning the operation into a painstakingly slow hunt through one of Earth's most remote expanses. For weeks, hope persisted, but the aircraft remained elusive, a phantom over an indifferent ocean. Scattered wreckage began to wash ashore on distant islands, small but telling markers of a plane's fate, each piece examined meticulously to reconstruct events over an ocean that revealed only partial truths. Investigators analysed wing components, flaperons, and sections of fuselage, confirming their origin as part of MH370. Each discovery provided new insight into the plane's final trajectory, yet none answered the most pressing questions about why it deviated from its route or what occurred in the moments before it vanished. Even tangible evidence could only hint at the story, leaving a broader mystery intact. Investigators analysed flight data records, satellite pings, and environmental conditions, considering everything from mechanical failure to unexpected manoeuvres, yet every conclusion remained constrained by the absence of definitive evidence. Official reports catalogued possibilities including autopilot operation, human error, and system malfunctions, but the lack of a complete flight recorder left every explanation provisional. Analysts, engineers, and pilots studied every fragment, every ping, every piece of recovered debris, striving to understand an event that had eluded observation and documentation in real time. Despite the exhaustive scrutiny, the flight remained unresolved, a modern enigma of air travel. Through the years, the final transmission remains the only unbroken thread connecting human presence to an aircraft lost over one of the most remote expanses on Earth. That single phrase, uttered calmly and without warning, has become emblematic of the flight's enduring mystery. For families, investigators, and aviation experts alike, the voice represents both closure and the ultimate absence, the last link to a journey that ended far from sight, deep over waters too vast to fully map. Its significance lies not in what was said, but in the silence that followed, a silence that persists above a region of ocean so vast it absorbs both questions and answers. Across the vast Indian Ocean, the words "Good night," Malaysian 370, linger as a solitary echo, a haunting reminder that some mysteries refuse to be recovered. The Polar Explorer Italia's Arctic Transmission, 1928. Over the endless Arctic ice, the Italia's radio crackled to life, sending the first faint signals that would mark the beginning of a perilous and uncertain ordeal. The massive airship, a symbol of human ambition and technological achievement, moved carefully over a frozen landscape that stretched farther than the eye could measure. For the crew and passengers aboard, each transmission represented not just communication, but a fragile lifeline to the outside world. Even in the earliest signals, there was a sense of precision and urgency, the careful choice of words betraying the knowledge that any error in the frozen expanse could prove fatal. The messages would soon carry the weight of history, tracing the desperate struggle of those stranded on ice. Led by Umberto Nobile, the crew had embarked on a mission that combined ambition, science, and the human desire to conquer one of the planet's most unforgiving regions. Nobile, a seasoned aviator and engineer, meticulously planned the flight, assembling a crew trained to endure extreme temperatures and prolonged isolation. Scientific instruments, maps, and supplies were carefully stowed, and every precaution was taken to ensure success. Yet, even with meticulous planning, the Arctic remained a vast and unpredictable environment, indifferent to human expertise. Each member of the team carried both excitement and apprehension, aware that their endeavour would test endurance, skill, and luck to the utmost limits. Frigid winds and drifting snow stretched below the airship as it glided through an expanse where maps ended and the horizon merged with ice, each mile testing both machinery and morale. The sun, low and pale, cast long shadows across crevasses and ridges of ice that could swallow a man or a vessel without warning. The Italia's engines hummed steadily, but the constant strain of Arctic weather tested the hull and the patience of the crew. At times, the only sound beside the engines was the distant groan of ice shifting beneath, a reminder of the hostile, frozen world waiting below. Each passing hour heightened tension, as navigation demanded careful calculation and every gust of wind threatened stability. When the Italia struck the ice unexpectedly, the metal frame groaned and shifted, prompting urgent radio messages that conveyed both the damage and the crew's immediate need for assistance. The impact was jarring, and sections of the airship buckled under the strain, forcing the crew to act quickly to assess damage, secure instruments, and protect one another. Within minutes, the radio operator began transmitting the first of several emergency messages, detailing their position and condition with a precision born of necessity. Each signal carried both hope and dread, a lifeline thrown across hundreds of miles of Arctic emptiness to anyone who might be listening. These communications became the only evidence of the crew's ongoing ordeal. Each transmission that reached distant stations was often fragmented, distorted by the polar atmosphere, yet contained enough information to hint at position, condition, and mounting desperation. Operators in Norway, Sweden, and Italy strained to interpret the crackling signals, piecing together coordinates and reports of injuries. Snowstorms and geomagnetic interference often rendered words unintelligible, turning what might have been clear instructions into a puzzle of static and fleeting phrases. Despite technological limitations, these messages provided a fleeting connection to humanity, giving rescuers their first real insight into the precise location and circumstances of the stranded airship. The signals, though imperfect, were a tenuous bridge over a landscape indifferent to life. On the frozen surface, the crew battled biting cold, shifting ice, and limited supplies, their only link to the outside world lying in the faint signals that crackled through the static. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, and the drifting ice floes made any movement treacherous. Crew members huddled together, rationing food and fuel, constructing makeshift shelters, and rotating watches to maintain warmth. Each transmission sent from the ice was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, combining technical skill with improvisation. Every signal broadcast carried both literal and symbolic meaning, a call for help, a declaration of existence, and a reminder that they were alive, even in a world where survival was far from guaranteed. Ships and aircraft dispatched from multiple countries scoured the icy waters, navigating treacherous seas and blinding blizzards, racing against both time and the unforgiving Arctic environment. Norwegian and Soviet vessels, as well as planes from Italy and other nations, participated in one of the most challenging rescue operations of the era. Crews faced storms, icebergs, and unpredictable currents, searching for signals and visual markers across an expanse of snow and water where one misstep could prove fatal. Each attempt to locate the Italia demanded ingenuity, courage, and coordination, and every sighting of a distant flare or radio signal offered hope while underscoring the stakes of failure. Time moved differently in these conditions, measured not in minutes but in the relentless struggle for life. Within the last transmissions, coordinates, descriptions of injuries, and rescue appeals revealed the stark reality of survival and the human vulnerability of those trapped on the ice. Crew members described frostbite, exhaustion, and the constant threat of shifting ice that could engulf their precarious camp. They requested assistance in precise terms, attempting to guide rescuers through the labyrinth of frozen terrain and unpredictable weather. Each message was carefully crafted, the words selected to maximize clarity despite static interference. In them, one could sense both the discipline of seasoned explorers and the fragility of human endurance in an environment that refused compromise. Although some crew members were eventually rescued, others were lost to the Arctic's vastness, leaving gaps in the narrative and a lingering uncertainty surrounding the final moments of those left stranded. Rescue teams recovered survivors over days, navigating perilous conditions that claimed both time and life. Yet the story of certain crew members remained incomplete, with fragments of their transmissions offering tantalizing glimpses of their fate. For historians, explorers, and radio operators alike, the incomplete record reinforced the Arctic's power to erase, obscure, and mystify. Even today, portions of the Italia's journey are reconstructed from partial transmissions, eyewitness accounts, and the scattered evidence of survival. The Italia's transmissions endure as a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the fragile threads that connect explorers to the world, even in the most remote reaches of the planet. They speak to a unique moment in history when technology, bravery, and the unforgiving Arctic intersected, producing a narrative both factual and mysterious. Scholars continue to study the signals, seeking to understand the limitations of early 20th century radio and the decision-making of explorers under extreme stress. Each message, each crackle of static, resonates not only with technical detail but with the human stories of endurance, fear, and determination that shaped the expedition. The echoes of these transmissions remain, a reminder that even the harshest environments cannot entirely silence those who reach beyond them. Silent now, the faint crackle of the Italia's final radio messages drifts through the Arctic night, carrying voices that would never fully return to tell their tale.